watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 66 of the podcast. We are getting more and more into the middle of Steven Spielberg's career, kind of covering his movies of the 90s and the 2000s. And yeah, it's been really good. We've gotten through a couple in Hook and Jurassic Park, and we are now hitting the second of his mega 1993 year in Schindler's List. And yeah, I have a new guest on the podcast with me today. Joe George is joining me. Joe, how are you doing?
I am very well.
Awesome. It's good to have Joe on. I've seen a little bit of his work. I know I've heard him. There's a podcast that's like a pop culture and Christian pop culture podcast called Think Christian, and they also have like a whole website with articles. And I know I've heard you pop on a couple of those episodes. So I was reaching out to new people and was like, this guy will be great to have on. So
Well, you
so
say
Joe,
that now.
yeah, we'll see. Well,
Yeah.
time will tell, I guess. But Joe, why don't you tell a little bit about who you are and what you do for the listeners?
Okay. Yeah, my name's Joe. I write. I'm a freelance writer, so I will write for anybody who pays me, essentially. But my main outlets or my main areas tend to fall into Christianity and pop culture, not Christian pop culture. I have no idea about any of that.
Yeah.
But
It's a difference.
there's a huge difference. So it's that one. I tend to write about pop culture in relationship to politics, particularly leftist politics, which I know is weird, but it's there. And then most of my mainline writing deals with kind of like nerd culture. So my major outlets that you'll find me on kind of regularly: Den of Geek, The Progressive, Sojourners, Think Christian, that sort of stuff. So I'm all around there, which sounds awful maybe to some people, but those are kind of the three things that I really care about, with pop culture in the middle.
Yeah.
I tend to focus on movies, but then also comic books, television, and when I get a chance, literature, because I do actually have a PhD in literature, but I don't. It's a lot harder to write a book review than it is to write, an hour and a half movie review. So
Yeah, right.
that's my work tends to do.
Yeah. No, that's great. It's you're people may say you're a cultured man.
They wouldn't say that
because but maybe only because you're writing about the culture all the time.
I am. I have written like 6 articles about the Joker this week at least. So
Man.
depends on where you go, high or low culture.
Yeah.
I think
Are
it's
you
all
a
the same.
Are you a fan of the newer Todd Phillips Joker movies?
No, they're utter garbage. They
Okay.
are such utter garbage.
I'm so
Are
glad
you?
to hear.
I'm so sorry.
No, I'm so glad to hear you say that, because I revisited the original one. I saw it in theaters. Had a really weird experience where I saw it like on opening weekend, and I don't think the audience understood what they were watching, because people were like laughing at things that were like kind of really dark, and I was like, this isn't very funny. So why are people laughing so much in this movie? Yeah, and then so I revisited it, and like I think I was too generous with when I like rated it before, and I was like, I don't think this movie is. I think this movie is like it's trying to be just like Martin Scorsese, but with like Joker cosplay. And then this new one, I just didn't. I liked it even worse. I told my wife, I was like, I was kind of bored. It was kind of boring.
It's an extremely boring movie, and it makes me angry on so many levels. One, that I think Joaquin Phoenix is one of our best actors.
Oh yeah,
working now,
and he's great in them.
See, I think he's garbage in them. I am
okay. That's fair.
I look at him in those movies, and I feel like I see later period Marlon Brando coming on. I see later period Johnny Depp. These actors who are really talented, and then nobody tells them no. Like the director abandons their job, and so I watch. I just wrote an article about this, so it's right in my head. But you compare, and I know this isn't fair, but I'm going to do it anyway. You compare the Joker to The Master, and both of them, Joaquin Phoenix is playing like a broken, disturbed man. And, I mean, Todd Phillips is not Paul Thomas Anderson. Most people aren't Paul Thomas Anderson, but still, Paul Thomas Anderson knows to say, pull it back, slow it down. We can do this all by zooming in on your face and you twitch. And Todd Phillips has none of that. He's just like, oh, do that weird, bend over weird. And that's going to be the movie. It's just, there's no imagination. When it's not cribbing from Scorsese, it's just dumping misery upon misery. And one of my huge pet peeves is people that confuse misery for death, like if it's dark and depressing and nasty and unpleasant, I'm saying something, but you're not. And especially then when you plug superhero stuff into that, and you're embarrassed of the superhero part, and you're not making it. It's such a mess to me that
it does feel like he's kind of embarrassed that, especially the second one feels like he's embarrassed of how the first one like was so great, like everyone loved it or whatever. I've seen some headlines that were like, Todd Phillips says he was not doing that, but it's like, well, then why does the movie feel like it? But we we'll probably hopefully get into a little bit of how to make a movie that is very grim but means a whole lot today in our discussion of Schindler's List. So that'll be a good juxtaposition of that discussion of Joker. But I always like to ask people when I have them on and I'm doing a director what their introduction was to that director. So, do you remember your first Spielberg movie?
Gosh. So I was born in 1978. So there was never a not Spielberg for me.
Yeah. I think since Jaws, there's never not been a Spielberg for people.
Yeah. I know I saw Jaws when I was about 6. You know what? It was probably Raiders, because Raiders is 82? And I know that I saw it right when it came out on this. Oh, I'm not this old, but I feel like I'm going to be old. I watched it on CED. Do you know what CED is?
I actually don't. I'm familiar with most of those old things, but I don't know that one.
This is it's a vinyl record that had a movie on it. So it looks like a laser disc, basically. Yeah. Except it's in a big plastic thing. But so I know that I watched it right when it came on video, which, back then that was like there's like a year or so lag. Yeah. So I probably saw it in 83. And I don't think I saw I know I saw Jaws way too young because I'm still to this day scared of sharks, but I don't think I saw it before then. I might have seen Close Encounters sometime around then. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, Raiders is the earliest one that I can remember, like running to my mom when Alfred Molina's dead body shoots out. Yeah. But then from that on, then I'm sure I was right at the right age for E.T. It was right. We were talking about Hook before then. It was right at the right age for Hook, and I was right at the right age for
Jurassic Park,
and Schindler's List, and I was right at the right age to be a snotty idiot when AI came out, and that I feel like everybody, at least my age, any film snob has like that moment where they're like, oh, Spielberg kid stuff.
Yeah.
He's doing a Kubrick, and so I walked out of the theater for AI and was like, not that I was a big Kubrick guy, but that was what you said. Oh, he botched that, and now I'm mature and old enough to know that's dumb, and not every Spielberg hits, but he's brilliant, and he's the best, and anybody who doesn't say that is just being contrarian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we'll get into it with the reception, because back really before Schindler's List, all through the 80s, people kind of talked about Spielberg as being really just kind of like artistically a lightweight, and like that's what the critics even back then were saying. They, he makes exciting movies and adventures, but it's kind of like artistically lightweight because he's not making movies like Francis Ford Coppola and like Martin Scorsese, all of his other buddies that were making these deep, cool movies or whatever. But and we'll definitely get into that. But yeah, that's really cool. It's always fun to hear people's first experience with, especially with a director like Spielberg, who feels like he's just always been around. In fact, whenever I was doing the Christopher Nolan series last, my comparison was always that Christopher Nolan is sort of becoming the new Spielberg, because he's becoming like a household name. He does the blockbuster movies. They make very different movies, but in the sense of like how they like resonate in pop culture, they feel pretty similar. But
which I think is great. I mean, I know that there's people that get snotty about that, but I love the fact that even now, again, I make a lot of my money off of writing about superheroes, but I too am a cinephile, and I share those concerns that superheroes are going to kill cinema. They're not, but it's wonderful to me that we're still finding new directors who people will come out to watch their movie, and I'm loving that. Recently now we've got people that are, they're going to go see the new Yorgos Lanthimos, and that's the way that they're going to describe it, and that's insane. But
I think the letterboxd culture has helped a lot with that.
Yeah, that's a really good observation.
Which is weird. It's weird that like a social media forum is doing something like good for the culture, but I feel like Letterboxd is doing that a bit.
That's a really good observation. You're probably right.
Yeah. But yeah, let's start jumping into Schindler's List, because there's a lot to talk about here. We'll kind of talk through how it got started and the production and all that. What's kind of different a little bit about this film compared to a lot of other ones I've covered is you really can't find a ton of stuff about like the behind the scenes. Like there's not really like making of documentaries. There's not like a ton of, there's not really, I even was looking on YouTube. There's like not really anything on YouTube. The special features on the disc were, there was one that was like a 25 years later panel with Spielberg and some of the actors. And then it's Shoah Foundation stuff and the kind of documentary that has all of the I think it's called Voices from the List. It's a bunch of the people that are in the movie sharing their stories. So you might listen to this episode and you're like, man, he didn't cover a ton of the production stuff like he normally does, and it's it's because it's just not out there. It's weird.
Yeah.
There might be some in a book out there somewhere that I don't know about, but I didn't find that book. So
Why do you think that is? That they didn't really push the behind the scenes as much for this one as opposed to.
It was a tough experience, as we'll see, for Spielberg. I think that's part of it. I feel like they weren't like doing a lot of extra like filming and taking pictures on set like you normally would, just because of the atmosphere and you saw on like the 25 years later them talking about how like tough it was, just every day was just so tough and challenging. And then Spielberg just felt like he didn't take a salary for this. He felt that was inappropriate, and so if you thought taking a salary was inappropriate, then he probably thought doing a making of documentary would be inappropriate too. So
yeah,
it's probably a lot of that stuff going on with this one. But you can find him like looking back on it. But I think in the moment, like he made it and he needed to like recoup after. So yeah. So the movie all gets started with this guy named Leopold Page, or I've seen also Paul Page. I guess he maybe went by Paul, which is actually his American name that he came up with, because his actual name is Poldek Pfefferberg, which is a character in the movie. It's based on this guy, and he was one of the German or Polish. I guess Polish people speak German, I think. The term is Schindler Juden, which is the Schindler Jews. So I'll probably just say Schindler Jews from here on out because that's easier. But he was one of the Schindler Jews who, survived the war, survived the camps, and after the war he moved to California with his wife, and they had kids. He opened up this it's like a luggage and leather shop in California. And apparently this guy had been like, it seems like he had the intent of moving to California so that he could get the story told. Because for years and years he had been telling people about this story. When he would run into writers or people in Hollywood, he would tell them the story. And even at one point, I think it was in the 60s, had even sold the story to MGM, and even gave Schindler some of the earnings. That a lot of the Schindler Jews were kind of supporting Schindler, who had some failed businesses and wasn't doing very well financially after the war. And so MGM never did anything with it, but so it comes into I didn't get the year on this, but I would imagine it's like probably late 70s, early 80s. This guy Thomas Keneally comes into his store looking for I think something to put his socks in, which is really weird to me. Like, why do you need something specifically for your socks? I just throw it in with everything else.
Yeah.
But he's this Australian author, Keneally, and he's Pfefferberg, or I guess Page, finds out that he is a writer, and it's like, have I got a story for you? And tells him about the Krakow ghetto and the camps, and about Schindler, and so Keneally takes it and runs with it. He starts. He really does. I listened to this book on audiobook. It's actually been like a month and a half or two since I listened to it. But I was like, man, I need to listen to this before. And so in the intro and outro, he does a lot of like kind of, I guess it would be even before the intro, like the prelude and kind of a postscript. He kind of talks a little bit about how he made the book and everything. And it's a novel. It's basically a novelization of all of this research he did, interviewing.
Is it more focalized through Page, or is it more focused on Schindler like the film is?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
It's now it's more, it covers, it's a lot wider than the movie. In fact, sometimes it's hard to keep up with because there's a lot more characters in the book. And you say characters, but he's basically like everything that could be historically accurate in the novel is. The only things that aren't are like dialogue or things that you just couldn't have exact. But he felt that it needed to be a novel. I think just to make it more accessible to people was his theory. And so any dialogue is based in real conversations that he knows of, but like he obviously doesn't have recordings of these conversations. So he's kind of like basing it off of how people talked about it and how people kind of talked about how Schindler talked and how Arnaud talked. And so it's really interesting. It's an interesting endeavor to take all of this extensive interview research that you've done with all these tons of people and turn it into a novel, a very historically accurate novel at that. So,
how satisfying must that have been for Paul to, go all this time knowing you have this story and not only get somebody who's going to pick it up, but then take it that seriously.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure that he shared that story with so many people that it bounced right off of them, or the MGM deal that you talked about where somebody thought they were going to do something with it and it ended up dying. And then you get this guy that puts that much work into it. That's remarkable.
Yeah. And it's, it speaks to the persistence of Page.
Yeah.
That he, he's just like, I'm going to keep telling people this until it gets made. But and Keneally publishes it in 1982. Sid Sheinberg, who was at the time, he was kind of Spielberg's like, I guess what would you call him, like biggest like cheerleader and supporter in the studio world at that time.
Or protector maybe.
Protector
almost?
is probably protector's a good. Yes, those are good words. See, that's why you're the writer and I'm not. So Sid Sheinberg tells Spielberg about this book. He wants Spielberg to make this movie. So while E.T. is in the process of coming out in 1982, Spielberg reads a New York Times book review. Is like, okay, I'm going to check out this book. Reads the book, and really like Universal, almost as soon as this book wins the Booker Prize, which was, I think it's like a United UK prize, book prize, it wins that, and Universal buys the rights to adapt, and they really buy it for Spielberg. Sid Sheinberg is the president of MCA, which is Universal is part of, and so he really buys it with Spielberg in mind. And so in 1983, Spielberg meets Paul Page, and they have their, he kind of gives him the whole story and stuff too. I can just imagine this guy's got it like down to a T by now.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, he's
like
got
he knows all the
pitch.
beats of this.
Yeah. That's interesting that they bought it for Spielberg in 1983.
Yeah.
We mentioned that he wasn't, thought of as a filmmaker like Coppola or Scorsese or anybody like that. And that's especially true in 1983. He's coming off big budget popcorn films. And I think even Lucas had more, because he had THX in his back pocket. I think even Lucas had more respect out of the brats of the era. That's really interesting that they had him in mind for that already.
Yeah, and I don't know what the thought was there, other than maybe Sid Sheinberg kind of already knew that Spielberg was wanting to make a more serious movie, which he spends a lot of the mid to late 80s trying to do.
Mhm.
And not, a lot of them not being like terribly, like kind of middling received or not very well received. And so, so Spielberg, he meets with Page. It's hard for me to think, like, do I call him Page or Pfefferberg? But yeah. And so they end their conversation, and Page asks him, like, okay, when are you making this movie? And Spielberg, kind of with a grin, says 10 years from now. And lo and behold, he was exactly spot on. So at the time, Spielberg just knew he wasn't ready. In fact, he told Spielberg, like, I don't know how to tell this story. Which is very, I don't know, very like wise of him to kind of say, I can't do this. It's not for me right now.
Yeah.
And
especially for I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Especially for Spielberg, who is so preternaturally visually talented.
Yes.
That's the thing that everybody talks about with him, is that he is a pure visual storyteller. And so that's remarkable wisdom for somebody who is such a whiz kid and so in control of his craft, to know that this is not just a matter of technical skill.
Yes.
He has that. He doesn't know how to handle the ethical stakes, which is, in this most recent rewatching, is the thing that jumped out at me the most, is how serious it feels, the weight of a blockbuster filmmaker dealing with an unspeakable tragedy.
Yes.
And it takes that very seriously, even if it doesn't quite pull it off. And we see him kind of aware of that already.
Yeah.
When he's on the top of the world, I love Scorsese. I'm not trying to disrespect him here, but especially around this time, he would have taken a hit of coke and then said, "Yeah, I'm going to do it." I know it doesn't quite go like that, but all of the other guys, they would have. They would. You don't see that. They have so much hubris, and I'm sure Spielberg had more than enough of that. But that's so remarkable that he took that issue so seriously, that he knew that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it was very personal too. He had always struggled with his Jewish heritage.
Yeah.
He grew up in New Jersey, and then Arizona for a bit, and then California. And in all of those places, kind of felt ostracized as a Jewish person. There was still a lot of trauma very much alive in the 50s and 60s along those lines. And he has memories of especially when they were closer to their family in New Jersey, of he saw the numbers on his grandma's wrist and didn't really know what that was. He realized later on in life. And his dad would talk about family that they estimated like 15 to 20 of their family died in camps in Ukraine and Poland. And so he doesn't know what to do with that as a kid, but also, all of his friends are celebrating Christmas and, probably going to church on Sundays, and, he's not doing any of those things, and he just feels, he feels kind of left out and ostracized. And so he really didn't like his Jewish heritage as a kid. And I still think at this point he really wasn't fully in the early 80s. He really wasn't reconciled with that yet. I think that really started when he had his first kid in the mid 80s, Max. He really started to reconnect with his faith, and it was really when Kate Capshaw, his wife, now in 93, when they got married in 91, she converted to Judaism before they got married. She really thought highly of their emphasis on family, that just kind of the Jewish traditions, and the emphasis on family, and investing in your children, and all that. And she was just like, I'm going to convert because I think this is, I think this is incredible. And so I thought that was really cool. And I think that even further spurred him on, so that by the time 93 rolls around, he's really ready to do it. But it took that long for him to kind of finally reconcile with those feelings of his childhood.
Yeah. I wonder how much of it was him, feeling like he needed that long to accept that he was the one that was going to tell this story. I mean, we know that people came to him about it, but I know so this is not even close to the same thing, but bear with me for a second. I am ethnically Jewish on my father's side, which, if you know anything about Judaism, means that it doesn't really count then. And it doesn't matter anyway, for me, because I was raised evangelical Christian. But the more that I find out about my background, the more there's that, like, even me saying that, is that there's kind of a weight of, well, do I get to claim that?
Right, yeah.
Do I get to say that, even though that's blood, whatever that means? But I'm sure that part of his wrestling then was also, shouldn't somebody who has not been shame maybe is too hard of a word, but ambivalent about their ancestry, shouldn't they be the one that is going to tell them? Which is strangely kind of works into the themes of the movie of, if you don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's definitely all there. So along those lines, he really, like, from the time Universal bought it until he made it, he was trying to push it off on other people. They got Keneally to write the first script. It was this 220-page long script. Spielberg kind of judged it pretty harshly. He was like, this isn't going to work. There's too many secondary characters, which is, like I said, there's a lot in the book of secondary characters. So yeah, in these 10 years while the film's on hold, it gets commissioned to this journalist, Kurt Ludke. He had just won Best Adapted Screenplay for Out of Africa, and he spends 3.5 years on this script. He's really focused on trying to make Schindler's conversion to the Jewish cause credible, and just isn't successful in that. Which, as we'll talk about in the movie, it doesn't really do that. What we end up with. So there's probably a reason he wasn't successful in that, because it wasn't really possible. But then, yes, so like you said, shouldn't somebody else make this? Well, Spielberg tried to get Roman Polanski to make it. And as people may know, Polanski was Polish. He was he escaped the camps, but survived the Holocaust. I think he was kind of stowed away with a Polish family, but he lost his I know his grandma and maybe even his mother.
I believe both of his parents, or never mind, I don't know for sure. I thought it was both of his parents.
It might have been both of his parents. I remember reading grandma and mother for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, he lost them to Auschwitz, and so yeah, he's very close, but it kind of is the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right.
Polanski declined. The wounds were still raw.
Right.
Which he did go on to make The Pianist later on. But at this point, Polanski wasn't ready either, because kind of the opposite reason. He felt too close to it.
That's really interesting, given what he did with Macbeth right after Sharon Tate's death, or not right after, but pretty close to after, which is the way that we usually talk about it, is him kind of purging all of that anger and regret into, I know Polanski's Polanski and all of that, but he's made some brilliant films, and Macbeth is just such a pure purgation. I guess that's the only word I could think of. Cinematic purgation. It's interesting that he was able to do that once, but not again.
Yeah.
At least at that time.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, and
Pianist,
I
think,
I
is a
guess he
very
eventually kind of did. I haven't actually seen The Pianist, so I don't know what exactly
It's
it
very
deals
good.
with. Yeah.
It deals with a
Well,
bad not Adam Brody. What's his name?
Adrian Brody.
Adrian Brody. Thank you.
Yeah.
It deals with a bad Adrian Brody performance at the center. It's
Mm,
it's too reserved. I
mm,
mean, and I don't say that from the perspective of, I don't judge how he had to process it, but
right.
just as a viewer of a film, it's it feels safe in a way
Mm,
that I feel like he fell on the wrong side of being too respectful to the point that the horror
yeah.
doesn't quite go through.
Maybe
know.
he still felt the same way, but felt like it was his duty maybe
Yeah.
to make something along those lines, and
Completely reasonable.
yeah. But then we also have Billy Wilder jumping in too. Billy Wilder offers to help. He lost most of his family to Auschwitz. He also talked about considering it his duty to have a film made like this, and so, but ultimately, in the end, Spielberg tries to get Scorsese to make it, and actually, Scorsese signs on. Spielberg felt like he could handle the grim atmosphere without watering it down, which is probably true. It would have been a very different movie, I think, but
Mhm.
he definitely wouldn't have watered it down. So, but as soon as Marty accepted, Spielberg regretted it. He had started to kind of feel like he was failing his duty to make a movie like this. And so what ends up happening is they pull a switcheroo. And so Scorsese was in the process of starting to possibly make a remake of Cape Fear. And so he's like, hey, can we switch these movies? You make Cape Fear and I'll take back on Schindler's List. And so they do that, and which I think Cape Fear is pretty good movie too. So
yeah, and I can't see Spielberg making that movie, really.
Yeah, it would have. They both would have been very different movies.
The one thing I would say about a Scorsese Schindler's List is Scorsese has such a religious imagination.
Yes.
That I think we would get maybe a little bit more of that. The first thing that leaps to mind is how raw Scorsese can be.
Mhm.
But the I'm thinking like the wedding scene, in particular in the finished Schindler's List. I would have
Mhm.
liked to seen a little bit more of that, and I feel like Scorsese would have dealt a little bit more headlong into the theodicy question in a way that Spielberg is a little too secular to worry about. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think we would have had a much more obviously tortured Schindler.
Yes.
Too, because it's very, very subtle in the version we have with Spielberg. Yeah. It's there, but subtle. And I think it's interesting to think about what Scorsese might have done with that. Would you have seen a little bit more of a darker end of what Schindler was like and how much he was wrestling with this? Because that's what Scorsese loves, is a main character wrestling with their humanity and and their choices, and so I love Scorsese's one of my favorite directors, but I'm glad we got the Spielberg version of this. Scorsese had commissioned a script from this guy Steven Zalian. It was 115 pages long. So Spielberg reads this script. He has a few problems. So Zalian was really wanting to make it more of a vertical view of through the eyes of Schindler, and Spielberg felt like it needed to be a little bit more horizontal. So it's sort of centers on Schindler, but we need to give some time to these other characters too. And so, he knew that there couldn't be too many secondary characters, but he also knew it can't be so solely focused on Schindler. that we don't get these other characters speaking in and giving different perspective as well. And I think that was smart too, especially because the story was told by those people in the
Yes.
first place.
Yes.
To Keneally. So yeah, I think very smart decision. And then also he didn't like that there was only like 2 pages on the liquidation of the ghetto.
Yeah.
Which we see in the movie, you know, that ends up being a pretty long sequence. It really gives some time and sits in that, which I think is also good, smart. And so Spielberg, I didn't read this, but I get the feeling that he did like the script overall because he sticks with Salian. In fact, they go to Poland for a few days together, I guess, to kind of like get in the mindset. And the revised script is 195 pages, but Spielberg's still hesitant. And so that was in, I'm guessing, like in about 1990, because a year later, while he's making Hook, he revisits that script, and he tells Kate Capshaw, "Hey, I finally think I'm ready to make this. This is going to be my next movie," which is a very wild thing to decide while you're in the middle of making the movie Hook.
Yeah. I mean, I already shared Hook is, to my mind, the worst Spielberg movie. But, you know, so much of Hook is, am I a good dad? You know, there's so much of that legacy stuff there that even the stuff that works in Hook, which is not much, is the father-son stuff. And I'm sure that a certain aspect of that was kind of unlocked in his mind.
Yep.
I mean, you had already mentioned he kind of reconnected to Judaism at first when his son was born, and that's so much of I want to reconnect with my son. I could kind of see the logic. Not to psychoanalyze him from this perspective, but I could at least see some logic that would link those two very disparate movies otherwise.
Sure. Yeah. I can see that too. Yeah, I mean, he finally, it's been 10 years almost, and he's like, I'm finally ready to make this. And then, so he starts, I guess, telling Universal and pitching what he wants to do with it. I guess they've maybe some of the executives have looked at the script, and they just weren't very encouraging, which is so strange because they bought it for him in the first place. And then when he finally comes around to wanting to make it, they're like, I don't know. And like I read that one studio executive offered to make a donation to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington that was going to open in 93 to kind of dissuade him, which is like, what? But at the same time, makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, a studio exec would do that.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then Tom Pollock, who was the head of Universal at the time, learned that he wanted to do it in black and white with this young unknown DP, who we know now as Janusz Kaminski, and he begged him to do it in color and transfer it to black and white so that they could release it in color on TV and VHS. Spielberg, Pollock also criticized the very thing that Spielberg was smart to do, which is there's no like cathartic scene to mark like Schindler finally realizing what he needs to do. And Spielberg stands firm, which at this point in his career, he's earned the right to do. Which is another reason why it's kind of important for a guy like Spielberg or someone with enough clout to make a movie like this so that hopefully they can make the right decisions as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spielberg stands firm. They're like, okay, I guess we'll do it. We'll give you a reduced budget of $22 million. And then Sid Sheinberg also, you know, he signed off on it with the caveat that he would direct Jurassic Park first. So which he
I
did.
mean, savvy business move, but
Yeah. Tough on Spielberg, as we'll see,
yeah.
but yeah, smart, I guess, for Universal. But yeah, Spielberg, as I said, did refuse the salary. Felt like it was inappropriate. He does do something with what would be what would have been his earnings, as we'll talk about later. But yeah, didn't take a salary for this. I mean, I guess he's basically working for free, for all intents and purposes, for this movie, but he wasn't, I don't think he was needing a whole lot of financially at this point anyways. So, which is cool. It's one of those things where sometimes when a director's, either like making a movie for free or putting their own money into it, it can kind of be like, I don't know if they need that much freedom. But in this case, it turned out good. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just it blows my mind too. I don't know. I know you sent me this run of show earlier, and I guess I just didn't notice that he had to fight for Kaminsky too, because my goodness, just rewatching this movie. I speak behind the curtain on my end. I haven't rewatched this movie in like 15 years, and so rewatching it just to get ready for this, and you're just struck at that lighting, and
it is beautiful.
It's so gorgeous. What?
Yeah.
I mean, I can understand from a cynical perspective why you might be scared of doing a Holocaust movie or whatever, but oh dang, how do you not look at what Spielberg's bringing you visually with Kaminsky and just say, well, it's going to be gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah, and even like in the little 25 years later panel, both Caroline Goodall, who played Emily Schindler, and Beth Davids, who plays Helen Hirsch, they both like went on for like 2 minutes each about how beautiful the movie was. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's very beautiful. But and it's probably, I'm pretty sure Kaminsky is Polish. And I think that might be a reason he really wanted this guy. He
makes a lot of sense.
He had seen his work and was like, I want to get this Polish guy to do this movie. And so,
hi. Quick reminder that you can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show.
Yeah, other crew, of course, Spielberg is a producer. Branko Lustig is a producer who was a Holocaust survivor. So, I think smart to get a guy like that on board to produce the movie. Gerald R. Mullen is back. He's I think he's done since Hook. He's been on the Spielberg producing board, and I know at least he does The Lost World as well, because I've already recorded that episode. But yeah, obviously based on the book by Thomas Keneally, and we've talked about the screenplay by Steven Zalian. We talked a little bit about Janusz Kaminski as the DP. I forgot, I was going to look up how they met, because I know there's like a story of how he met Janusz Kaminski, and I just totally forgot to look that up. So I'll have to like maybe squeeze that into a later episode for people interested. But it's really the first of a very long collaboration. They do. He's this DP for every movie after this.
Yep.
So all the way through The Fabelmans. And I don't know if he's signed on for whatever Spielberg's doing next, but I hope so, because that means it'll look good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, he did have some ADs, some assistant directors on this one. Sergio Mimica Gazan and Marek Brodsky. One of those will come up in a bit. I don't know which one it is. Because Liam Neeson didn't mention it, but you'll know what I mean in a minute.
Okay.
Michael Kahn and John Williams, his tried and true editor and composer, of course. A few sound guys on this one. The only one that is, I think, for sure returning from other movies is Ron Judkins. But Andy Nelson, Steve Peterson, Scott Millen, and Charles L. Campbell all do a lot of sound work. Production design by Alan Starsky. He a lot of these people really don't have like huge filmographies that they've worked on, because I was looking at them and I was surprised. I was wondering, like, okay, how did he pull this team together? Because he has some returning guys, but a lot of these people aren't like super like big or like didn't do a ton of stuff. The set decorator was the same thing, Ewa Braun.
It's interesting because it is a fantastic looking production.
Yeah, it really is.
And it was quite the undertaking. So you would think you'd be grabbing newbies especially given all the I mean, just if you even took that seriousness aside and you were just doing a any sort of period piece, it's quite the undertaking. And so that's interesting. They have to have some sort of history that would have made them the right people to this, and they pulled it off. It's an amazing looking film.
And I wonder if a few of them might have been just over there. They were, maybe he found, because Ewa Braun and Alan Starsky both sound like they could be over there in Poland. Judy Alexander Corey, who did the hair, maybe not so much. And then there's Christine Smith and Matthew Mangle for the makeup. Definitely wanted to hit those because they do get a nomination. As we'll see. Costume design, Anna B. Shepherd. She is Polish, I know for sure. And she's won a few Oscars. So she's one of the ones that I was like, oh, okay, she has a big filmography, a big span of work. She actually won an Oscar for The Pianist as well, which we talked about. And then also for Maleficent, which is very extremely different from those two.
Hey, great costumes though.
Yeah. VFX were done by Gail Curry and Steve Price, and then finally the special effects by Bruce Minkus. I don't know a ton of what those guys were doing other than making smoke, and there's not a ton of like big in your face effects like there usually is in a Spielberg movie in this movie. But I think for a movie like this, it's kind of like, if you don't notice like it's probably because they're doing their job well.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, I don't know.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say it's just a lot of like, obviously this is in the war, but there's not like, we're not in the war, we're in the camp, and so it's a lot of like getting this machinery to, function in the right way probably, and getting this, smoke to billow just right, and it's probably a lot of that sort of stuff going on that they're working on.
I think though part of it, it goes back to that tension, the fact that this is a blockbuster film about an unspeakable horror, and you have to have just the right alchemy. And I'm thinking of this the sequence when it's a tracking shot about 2/3 of the way through the film, where we're following upscale women, and it seems like it's snowing.
Yes.
And then you walk, and Schindler walks out, and he realizes it's ash from bodies. I think that sequence has to be just right, because it needs to shift from that sort of beauty and wonder that Spielberg does so naturally to then the humanist horror that needs to happen, and it needs to have the right VFX team and sound effects team, because you have to believe they're walking through snow, and it's a oneer. It's one of those gorgeous, the subtle Spielberg oneers that takes you from beauty to horror all in one time. So you're right, it's not a flashy effects movie,
but it's that subtle that
and it's got to be precise in order to pull off the magic trick of the movie.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really, really good example for sure. Yeah. Really, really incredible stuff as far as that goes. And they were filming this in winter there in Poland. So I wonder if any of the snow ended up being real.
Interesting.
Could be, but I didn't really see any of that in my research. So I know it was cold because the actors would talk about being like really cold on set. But, the cast, Spielberg. Spielberg had said in one thing that I saw that this is a very performance-driven film, and that's very true. The movie doesn't work without the performances, which is true of any movie. But I think if everything else were right and the performances were a little off in this, it just wouldn't work the same.
Absolutely. Especially, I think that big three of Neeson, Kingsley, and Fiennes.
Yes.
Those all have to be so tuned. It's not just, Schindler, his gamemanship, and then his moral shift. It's also Spielberg he shoots Neeson like he's a old school matinee star.
Yeah.
And you have to, those profile shots, he's got such a great face.
Yeah.
And Kaminsky and Spielberg know how to shoot that. Anytime he's in profile and the smoke is and the light is dancing, that could be something Cary Grant would do. That should be something Valentino should do. And he doesn't shy away from those, especially in the first third of the film. From doing that. I mean, and he knows that he needs Schindler to look good. He needs Scout to look good, in order for the film to be honest in a strange way. But then you've got Kingsley, who is the moral focus, who cannot speak.
Yes.
Right? He can't really say his suffering, and so it's all there in his face and his eyes. And those three are doing such a balancing act
and his mannerisms too. I think of the scene where like Kingsley runs up to the fence and like at first he's like really like urgently like waving Schindler over, and then like realizes like, oh, I can't be so, I need to be like calm it down a little bit, and it's all like within a second. But it's all there, and that takes some really, really great acting to pull that off. But Spielberg focused on Stern from the beginning. He really, really wanted to get that casting right. And largely because when they were writing it, it was a very difficult character to write. He's kind of an amalgamation of different people in the book. And so, which usually happens in a movie. Usually you kind of like mush some characters together from the book that can kind of be have a little more breadth to it. So they modify the history a little bit, but it's all still there. But yeah, they really wanted to get this right. It was actually offered first to Dustin Hoffman. He declined. That would have been,
I don't think that would be bad. I don't hate that idea.
It would have been interesting. He has a little nervousness to him. That could work, I think. I haven't seen I'm not like terribly familiar with Hoffman.
Okay.
I've seen him in a few things, but it's definitely, I can see that.
He's got nerviness, and he's got, Kingsley can certainly have an edge and a grumpy, by all accounts, he's like that in real life. But I could see Hoffman playing the resentment, a little bit more. Than Kingsley's. He plays Stern as as savvy.
Yes.
Rarely lets Schindler see his resentment for the position that he's in.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I don't hate that casting, but
yeah,
I'm glad we got what we got.
yeah. Second choice was Kingsley. So he had won Best Actor for Gandhi in '83. Obviously had been working since then, but that was his last like really, really huge performance. And they actually met during Jurassic Park filming. So yeah, so I guess he met him. When you're shooting a blockbuster like that, people will just kind of swing by the studio.
Okay.
That kind of have clout and can do that.
It's good to be the king, I guess.
Yeah, I read about that in Hook too. People kept it talked about like people just kept swinging by and seeing what was going on, and so it might have been one of those things.
Okay.
Kingsley was like, "Let me see about these dinosaurs," and
I mean,
ended up getting casted in this. So,
wow, bit off more than he was intended.
Yeah.
You want to see dinosaurs, and then you have to have this incredibly difficult part.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But I thought this was really cool and probably speaks to why Kingsley is so good in this. He, at one point early on, he had asked Spielberg, like, hey, what do you think the dramatic function of Stern is? And he had Spielberg write down his answer on a piece of paper, and he wrote down his. And so Spielberg's answer was witness. They both wrote down one word things. So witness was Spielberg's, and Kingsley wrote down conscience. And so the whole time they were shooting, Kingsley kept those two pieces of paper in his pocket, just kind of as a reminder of these are my dramatic functions, to be a witness and to be a conscience in the film.
For whom, I wonder?
It seems, I would think for Schindler, because you can see it as you watch through the film. He gets more, as the movie goes on, he gets more and more willing to kind of speak his mind to Schindler. It starts off very subtle with like nudges, and then by the end, he's saying, no, this is the right thing to do. He's like telling him outright, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And even like when they're making the list, but then even reassuring him, in the end, as his conscience in a way, like, no, what you did is a good thing. You did more than most,
Yeah.
And so, and then witness does make sense, I guess. He's kind of, in a way, you kind of see both Schindler and Goat from Stern's eyes in a way, because he's kind of the right-hand man to both of them. And so, yeah, a lot of stuff kind of runs through him. I don't know, it's interesting. I thought that was probably speaks towards something in his performance, that he was kind of carrying those around in his pocket.
mean, we'll talk more about it later, I think, but the reason I ask that is because I think Stern plays such an interesting role in this is such a Gentile centered movie. The people who are primarily suffering their suffering isn't centered. It's refracted through Schindler and Gare, and it's almost, I would almost call Stern a translator of trying to translate the humanity to that. But then, then you also think of that in relationship to the audience, who certainly is going to have a Jewish audience, but Universal and Spielberg are not making this movie for just a Jewish audience. They want all the Gentiles to be in there too, and so it is Stern also, I'm wondering, witnessing, and this gets, we'll argue about this later, I'm sure. Is he witnessing, so to speak, the actual suffering to then present that dramatically to an audience, all these levels of refraction, and can we actually do that? Should we actually do that with such an unspeakable suffering? And then is he also the audience's conscience in a certain way, that warning us not to be seduced by the inherently spectacle nature of cinema? That, Garrett, the man, was a horrible monster. Ralph Fiennes is a incredibly handsome, charming, charismatic movie star.
Yeah.
And Spielberg cannot help but make him look amazing. And so we need that we'll talk about that. But I think that there's another aspect that happens on the audience and film relation as kind of like a barrier between the actual suffering that cannot be said, where he's playing in that as well. So anyway.
Yeah. And I almost wonder too, like, you could also use witness in the less like the observational way and more like the action of witnessing, because there is a sense in which all through the movie Stern's kind of whispering in Schindler's ear, like to like pull these people in, and then it finally gets to the point where they're making a list of names together, so he's almost acting as a witness to, like, hey, this family needs some help. Hey, can you help out these guys? I've heard about these people. And, Schindler's like ambivalent toward it for a lot of the movie. But eventually, he comes up with the idea himself. He doesn't need Stern to like tell him, let's save these people anymore. He's telling Stern, hey, here's what we're going to do. And
we're going to make
you can see on Kingsley's face, like, he's finally got it. I don't have to like nudge him anymore. So I don't know. You could think of it. I don't know if that's what Spielberg meant when he said witness, but that could be an aspect, for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I like what you said about Fiennes. And I think there's a lot of intentionality, because I have this quote from Spielberg about casting Ralph Fiennes, and he had seen him in a TV movie about Lawrence of Arabia, got some audition tapes from him, and he said, this is what Spielberg said: Ralph did 3 takes. I still to this day haven't seen take 2 or 3. He was absolutely brilliant. After seeing take 1, I knew he was Ammon. In his eyes, I saw sexual evil. It is all about subtlety. There were these moments of kindness that would move across his eyes, then instantly run cold. And when I read that quote, I was like, that is like to a T what you see in those close-ups of Ammon through the movie. Like these moments of like, oh, he looks gentle, and then like instantly like that's why like he's constantly like catching you off guard with how just purely evil he is, because in his eyes and in his face you're almost like you said, seduced. Like he looks kind of gentle, he looks kind of, he's well manicured, and even to the point where Helen Hirsch is like doing his nails at one point, literally being manicured. But yeah, it really is incredible. Ralph Fiennes is so good in this movie. And I was happy to hear other cast members talk about how on set he was pretty reserved. He wasn't like, how some actors can really like let the character overtake them. And so he was subdued on set, didn't really do much talking, I think, because he didn't want to be like some actors that can be brash when they're playing a brash character. But then offset, apparently he was able to kind of switch off, be normal kind. So I was like, well, good on Ralph Fiennes for that. That takes because I know it's hard, I know it's probably really hard when you're playing a character like that.
Yeah.
To turn that on and off, and
to be that. Sexual evil is such a good in his eyes. You see that.
Yes.
That's such a spot on description for that character.
Yes.
He's a shark. He's a predator, and in the body of this very good looking man, and so that requires on his part to shift, to make even things that should be good and lovely and kind. There's always the air of menace. The moments. One of the bigger moments that jumped out at me at this watch. There's the sequence where the Schindler's people are in the train, and Schindler's encouraging, like, has to do it as a joke, but it's also like spray down the train.
Right.
And Garrett and everybody, all the other Nazis, are laughing at him. And there's this moment where Fiennes plays it perfectly, where Garrett looks at him, and he's, his laughter subsides for a minute, and you can just see it in his eyes that Schindler's serious about this.
Yes.
And you see him go from Schindler's a good time, my buddy, to he is my enemy.
Yes.
In one single shot, he transforms it, and it's all in the eyes, it's all in the posture, and so to be able to be in that sort of mindset where you can have both of those, that's got to be a lot of probing places most of us don't want to go to, and
yes,
it required him to do that. So I can see that definitely.
Yeah, and that's a great example. The one I was thinking about along those lines is when he's, Schindler's convinced him that pardoning people is power.
Yep.
And he's he's pardoned the boy once with the saddle, and then he's tries to pardon him again from the tub, not getting the tub clean.
Yep.
And he's like doing the I pardon you in the mirror, and you can see he's like really trying, but then it just in an instant it switches off, and he goes, and grabs the rifle, and just in an instant he realizes, no, I don't want to pardon people, and it just
himself
cold.
I mean, total affectless. Just there's nothing. He's a psychopath. I mean, that's not the right word, but there's just, he loses all humanity.
Yeah,
and it's a showy moment. That was I watched this movie when it first came out. It was one of those that was, it was an important movie, and so even as a dumb teenager, it was impressed upon me. This is important. And that was one of the sequences that stuck with me as a kid, and so kind of in memory, getting away from it, I kind of was like poo-pooing that scene. It's like, it's a little too cinematic, it's a little too showy for, and it is, but it's also so perfectly executed.
Yes.
He's doing a full Hitchcock thing where, Fiennes is looking in the mirror, and therefore he is refusing to pardoning himself while he's pretending to pardon the kid, and condemns himself as he condemns the kid. But then the way that he so coolly turns around to grab the gun and walk towards it's
like he's getting back into his routine.
That's such a perfect way of putting it. Yeah.
He's Schindler knocked him off of his routine for a bit, and he's like, no, I'm going to go back to my normal everyday habits. And because that first scene you see of him where he is shooting off the balcony, it's so casual.
Yep.
It's like he's got his shirt off, he's kicked back.
Yep.
And so it's like
exercise.
Yeah, he's reverting back to that in a way.
That's a great
and it's easy to condemn that in this very evil character, but we do, a lot of times we end up doing the same thing, maybe not killing people, but we'll do really well at getting rid of a bad habit for a while, and then in an instant you can revert back to it. But
and I think they go so hard into Amund's routine because of his responsibilities. It's a cliche to talk about how the Nazis had the I had the trains run on time, and I do appreciate how often this movie highlights Nazi inefficiency in a way that's kind of fun. But that was it plays with that trope really well, and I think so. That's why I think routine is such a good word there, because that is part of the reason that the Jewish Holocaust was so horrifying, even more so than the many other Holocausts that we humans do, was its mechanistic efficiency, and the machine overtakes the human, and that's how that happens. Is it becomes his routine, and therefore he doesn't have to think about it and doesn't have to look in the eyes, and that sort of impotentia power that Schindler's trying to impart upon him, that doesn't make the trains run on time. That's what he needs.
Yeah,
that's such a good word.
Yeah, no, it for sure is. And from what I can tell from both the book and hearing interviews, is that Goat was even worse in real life. He was
really,
he was. We see some of the arbitrary killing in the movie, but he was just apparently just way worse in real life. This is like the light version, Goat light, I guess, in Schindler's List, which is
horrifying.
Yeah. Hard to move on from that, but the cast, the rest of the cast, you have we mentioned Caroline Goodall as Emily Schindler, smaller part, and Beth Davids as Helen Hirsch. A lot of these are like kind of secondary characters, and they're important, but not big parts, I would say. They have a few scenes each that are very important and very well acted, but they're not like, it really is those main three that we spend the most time with. And Jonathan Segal plays Poldek Pfefferberg, who, as we know, is Paul Page, the man that told the story. And these are things that really happened to this guy. And I think for reference, I'm pretty sure he is the guy when Schindler goes into the church and is asking the guy, like, where'd you get that shirt? I'm pretty sure that's him. That's Pfefferberg.
I don't remember that scene.
Yes, it's when they're like they're in the church, all the other guys leave. They're like they see his swastika pin, and they're like, oh, we're just here to pray. And Schindler, he's the one guy that stays and finally like caves and like, okay, this is how much the shirt is, Schindler's
I'm totally brain farting on that scene right now, so I can't tell you.
Oh man.
I tracked him in other scenes. He's woven through the narrative.
He is
really, I didn't notice until afterwards that's Pfefferberg. He's the one that brought the story, and so I thought that was really savvy how they work him through as witness without actually being the main character. But gosh, I'm totally blanking on that scene right now.
Yeah. Well, those are really like the three main like secondary characters, I think. There's a ton of German and Polish actors that, like, when you read through the cast list and like the characters they played, it's kind of hard to like, okay, maybe you recognize a few of the names, you remember them being said, but you would never in a million years be able to say, this is that character, this is that character. But again, it's like when you're watching the movie, you don't feel like that. You feel like they're very personal and individualized, which says a lot.
Well, it's Spielberg's. He knows where to get a good face, and he knows how to give tiny arcs to each of them. Like I can't tell you the name of the guy, but the literature professor who becomes a shop worker. He's got a distinctive face, and we get his big arc is when he's deemed useless, and then Stern comes along and says, "Oh no, you dropped your papers." and he keeps reoccurring throughout the movie. Never again a big arc, but you're like, that's literature guy, or the woman,
the woman and her daughter.
Yep, exactly. Couldn't tell you her name, but every time she pops back, she's got a great face, distinctive, and every time she pops back up, and so it's that.
And you kind of have a feel for the kind of person she was, even, which is weird because I couldn't vocalize it now, but when I was watching, I was like, oh yeah, it's this lady.
Yes.
You know, her daughter's friends with the little boy that, you know, told her to hide under the stairs. It's like you can remember all these things about these people, but they don't have very much screen time each. No. Very, very impressive.
I mean, that's the economy of storytelling that you can do in movies that Spielberg is so good at that makes him the right guy for this. Because if it was the earlier versions of the draft that had way too many characters, that would lose the audience. The individuals would get lost in the sort of mass. Yes. But if it was the first script that was just about Schindler, then it would totally be about the Gentiles, and it would be entirely the people who are suffering, the oppressed, get lost. He splits it just perfectly, and most filmmakers, I don't think, would be able to do that, to make you understand that these are real people, or to stop the entire movie and just have them declare their names. You know, that there's meaning in that that tells us that this is not actually Schindler's story. He's the one that we're following because he's Liam Neeson, and this is how Americans, at least, digest stories now, a narrative. Yeah. But it's bigger than what it's representing.
Even further than that, it all goes back to the Schindler Jews.
Yes.
When the Schindler Jews, when they were interviewed, they all talk about Schindler. Yeah. So the movie centers around Schindler, yes, because that's the way they remember their experience. It's all connected. All of their experience connect back to Schindler. Here's what Schindler did for me. Here's my experience, and then here's what Schindler did for me. And then, you know, the next one, here's my experience, this was what Schindler did for me and what he means to me. He's like the top of the connection pyramid. Yeah. You know, everyone says, you know, however many degrees of separation from any other person, and you know, Schindler, usually it's because there's one person that you can trace a lot of stuff back to, and it's like Schindler's that to them. And so it centers around him, but that's because that's the story, the way the story was told by the people that he saved. They told their stories with him at the center.
That's such a good observation.
And I think that when we get into some of the criticisms of the movie, I think that's something that the people that were down on this movie forget, is that yes, he centers Oskar Schindler, but you have to remember that it's because the literal Jewish people that were saved by Oskar Schindler centered Oskar Schindler when they told their story. All of their stories centered around him. And so there's no other way to tell the story, because that's how the witnesses that experienced it told the story. And so it's kind of unfair to be like, oh, you centered this Gentile man, when it's like, yeah, so did the people that told me the story.
There'd be a weird sort of appropriation that by twisting their words to meet. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
And speaking of Oskar Schindler, he's the one cast member I saved him for last. Liam Neeson, obviously. So Spielberg is usually pretty good. Every once in a while you get a bad casting, but usually he's really good at casting. And this is an example of just great casting, because he wanted a really solid actor that wasn't that well known for Schindler. Because he didn't want the fame of the actor to interfere with the character. He didn't want people to have preconceived notions of the types of people this person played in their heads while they were watching the movie. And so Neeson at this time was that. He he had worked with Spielberg briefly. He was actually hired during Empire of the Sun to read across from actors auditioning for Jim Graham. But ultimately Neeson wasn't cast in the movie. And so Neeson actually talks about this being like a really, like, he was struggling at this time. He had tried to get into movies. He wasn't in a ton of movies. He had like some small parts in Excalibur in 81 and The Mission in 86. But really like didn't have much to speak for as far as movies. And he had a stint in Broadway during this time. So he just had a lot going on. So he ends up going to play in the Broadway show Anna Christie, which I know nothing about.
I don't know that at all either.
But apparently he was really good in it. Spielberg had gone with his wife and mother-in-law to see it in 1992. They went backstage afterwards, and his mother-in-law was like praising Liam Neeson and telling him how great he was in the show. And Liam, it said they talked about how Liam gave his mother-in-law just this long hug as she praised him for his performance. And they were leaving, and Kate Capshaw says to Spielberg that how Liam acted was exactly how Schindler would have acted in that same circumstance. And Spielberg was like, I think you're right. I think we need to get him in and see if he's our man. So yeah, he fit the profile. Spielberg was like kind of modeling the casting around his friend Steve Ross, who was his friend. He was the head of WB, mostly not from personality so much as like physical presence. He was a really big guy, and Liam Neeson's a really big guy. So it all kind of like fit together. He acts like Schindler. He's big like Schindler, like I want Schindler to be. And so yeah, he gets the job and takes the first plane to Krakow as soon as he finishes his last performance on Anna Christie. So yeah, it's interesting. And Liam Neeson I get the feeling that he's a really like kind guy. When you watch interviews with him, he just has this kind of a lot of it is in like his accent and the way he speaks maybe. But he just has this very kind way of speaking, and it sounds very proper, but like you're like, this guy would take care of me. That cadence of like, oh, I can trust this guy. And apparently he was like that. He actually is kind of like that. Him and Kingsley talked about how after particularly hard days, they would take they would buy drinks for all the Jewish cast members and kind of to take care of them. And yeah, it seems like he actually is that way. So, which is good.
Yeah, and he has that presence of, I really hate the most recent Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe adaptation, except for its casting. And it's like, yeah, that's exactly what I pictured Aslan to be like. The both powerful. I
totally forgot he voiced that.
Yeah, and Tilda Swinton is the White Witch. I'm like, it's got great casting. It's just a dumb movie that doesn't know how to handle the actual climax in which God sacrifices God's self instead of kicking the bad guy's butt. But it's such a bad movie, but it's well cast, and that's the energy Neeson has. Or in the non-musical Les Miserables, where he plays Jean Valjean, it's the same sort of thing where he's huge and powerful, but he's got so much sadness in his eyes. And it's so interesting to, you mentioned that Spielberg wanted an unknown, and now Neeson's almost overly known.
Yeah.
We look at him as he's the guy with a certain set of skills. He's
Qui-Gon Jinn for me.
What's that?
Like we talked about the prequels. He's Qui-Gon Jinn for me.
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that.
The best prequel character that they killed off too soon.
I mean, yeah, he's got that soulfulness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting when I was going back to rewatch this to see, though, I mean, all of that aspect is there. The power, Physical presence is there. The kindness, the vulnerability in the eyes is all there. But he's such a glad-hander in this movie in a way that I don't really associate with him.
Yeah, he's very confident, and he does the like he has all of that stuff that we've been talking about, but he also somehow pulls off where you look at this guy and you're like, oh, he's a swindler, which Oscar Schindler was. He knew how to work the crowd and get people to do what he wanted, and it's weird. I don't know how you do that as an actor, how you pull off like, I'm going to be both like kind and vulnerable, but also like in control of the room and in control of every conversation I have.
It's remarkable. And I think part of it is the narrative helps him and the direction helps him in that I mean, again, he's shot like a matinee idol.
Yeah,
all of the and styled like one. His hair is slicked back. They know just how to light that face, and the eye lighting that just highlights so much. He's given that, but he's also given he's the movie, I think, is canny in how it suggests that maybe Schindler isn't quite as good a businessman as he thinks he is,
Sure.
That part of what the reason that he's pulling this off is he's playing the Nazis. He's speaking their language, I guess, in a way that I don't know is always as savvy as I think a lesser movie would have made him. No, he's Tony Stark. He's going to walk in and he's going to charm everybody and he's going to walk away. And the movie, I don't think is doing that. He's kind of also right guy at the right place at the right time, who just so happened to have the witness and the conscience next to him that was able to direct him to do something great. But there's no inherent greatness in him.
Yeah, and I had this way later on in the notes, but I think it's a good place to probably talk, just to mention. So in the book, it talks about all of this kind of stuff, and you get a little bit of it in the movie. But Goethe and Schindler were very similar people. They had this aspect of vulnerability about them, but also like when they needed to take command, they took command, and really like that aspect of them for both of them is kind of like an act. Like they have to put that on. They're both, I think when you see them alone or when you see them where the camera's looking at them but nobody else really is when you actually see what they're like. But then when they have to interact with someone, it's all like this put on, and they want to be. I think the drive that you can boil it down to for both Goethe and for Schindler is they want to be respected. And I don't remember what Goethe's past is, but Schindler, very much in line with what you've been saying. He showed up to Poland with nothing. And he was on a mission to prove to his father-in-law that he could be something. His father-in-law looked down on him. And so he resorted to the black market and war profiteering, so that he could make something of himself to be respected by his father-in-law and, obviously other people too. And that's what Goethe ultimately is his drive too. He wants to be respected. His method is different, and it's evil and human. Whereas Schindler never is able to let go of his humanity. Thank God, right? It's not a thin line between the two. It's a pretty wide line between the two. But the drive for both of them is very similar. And, and then also there's like kind of personality quirks. Like they both really love a good drink. They both really love women. The book talks a lot about that how they both really loved women and they both really loved drinking. Yeah. And so I think that's why Schindler was able to do what he did, because Goethe saw himself in Schindler, and in a way that allowed Schindler to kind of like gain his trust in a way that other people might not have. He always had those character flaws where you couldn't fully say like, oh, this guy is just trying to do the right thing. It's but he's also like sleeping around and drinking too much at the party. And so Goate's like, well, he can't be that good. He's drinking with us and sleeping around. So other people wouldn't have been able to do what Schindler did. It's almost like you needed that guy that wasn't, all that great of a guy maybe necessarily to be able to pull that off.
I don't know. I'm really wrestling with how thick the line is between them, because part of me wonders, and I'm just making this up as I'm talking right now, so this might be completely unfounded, but part of me wonders if the difference is really Stern and there's that scene relatively late in the movie where Schindler tells Stern, "You ran my company, you made my fortune," and that is, I think the movie bears that out. And so, Stern is an assistant to Garrett at times, but he doesn't. His end with Garrett is different than his end with Schindler, and so what I'm getting at is, I wonder if Garrett and Schindler really are kind of the same type of dude. But because of the Schindler's goal of making as much money as possible, Stern was able to inculcate himself and do this work at least to the point that until Schindler thawed and gained some humanity, because it's not a put on at the start where he's like, this is my workforce, these are materials for me to make money. That scene,
they're cheap,
exactly, and he even mentions that. And the scene that jumps out is when the one-armed man comes to tell him thank you, and part of the darkness of that, or the power of that scene, is that he's beginning to feel the prick of consciousness, and that's why he's pushing back so hard. He would not have gotten to that. I don't believe that he would have gotten there without Stern. And I believe that's the only difference between him and Garrett at that time is when Garrett had his prick of consciousness, there was nobody in the bathroom next to him to look at. It was just himself in the mirror. And so he was able to shrug it off, go back to his routine, and shoot the kid. Had they been reversed, I think they could have done it. And I think that's borne out visually, but I'll shut up for a second.
Yeah. I can definitely see that. I think reading the book, and I think it might be a little bit distorted in just the way that history is made.
Sure.
I don't think it's something we'll ever really know. I mean, obviously we won't ever really know because it happened one way and that's the way we know it. But I mean more in the way of like, when these, all of these interviews are not from Schindler. They're from people that he saved. And so they'll talk about his flaws. They'll talk about how he loved women, and but you always get the sense that there might be a little bit of distortion because this is the guy that saved us. Like, you can't speak too badly about him. Because, he was our salvation. He was, he's why we have grandchildren now, otherwise we wouldn't be around, and neither would our kids or their kids. And so there's a sense in which, like, we'll never know because that's just not how you're going to talk about. You're not going to get someone that has had their life saved by this guy that's going to just like trash him,
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I do wonder. It is interesting to wonder about that, and probably like that's a really great, I guess, mental exercise to take away from a movie like this is what is that line? What and I think movies are entertainment, but movies are also something that we can digest and learn things about ourselves, obviously, and so something to chew on, like where's that line? Where do I lie? What are the things? Who can I put around me as a conscience that'll keep me from going the goat side instead of the Schindler side? But yeah, it's super. It's really interesting also how history gives us these quote unquote characters that allow for such like mental exercises of juxtaposing these two people who are very similar in nature but ended up on opposite sides of history. Like, what's the difference there? And it's not just a story that someone's made up to like force us to think that. It's a story that's like based in reality, and so it's all the more interesting because of that.
Which helps kind of earn some of the more obviously artificial, artistic moments. You know, I would like to go back and rewatch the movie, but I can't. There are a lot of, I would dare say, almost entirely two shots when Garrett and Schindler are together. It's not the like Jonathan Demme Silence of the Lambs things where it's shot reverse shot. We're watching people fight over the scene.
Right.
They are together, and there are so many compositions that are the two of them facing one another. We get the one about a third of the way through when they're buddying up, kind of wheeler dealing, where Schindler's in the foreground in profile, Garrett's in the background in profile, and because of the perspective, they seem to be facing one another as they have this conversation, or the conversation about power, where Schindler's a little bit higher up, and Garrett's, or we get the one conversation that's shot from through a barn door, and each person is in the frame. The movie is constantly telling us that these two are reflecting one another. They're not facing off against one another. They're reflecting. They're equal to each other's piece. And so, that's a flourish. That's artifice.
Yeah.
That's a visual flourish. But because, like you said, because it's there in the reality, Spielberg has some license to also make it beautiful.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I think it also emphasizes too, the fact that it's strange because you wonder, like, why did Goetz let Spielberg do? I mean, let Schindler do what he did in the end. Why did he sell him all of these? And I mean, the easy answer is like for the money.
Yeah.
Obviously, like that's probably the reality. But I don't know. There's you have enough to go off of from this guy where you could say, like, he might not take the money. He might just say, let's kill all of them. He's done enough arbitrary killing that you could go there with that guy. You could say, he might just say, no, forget that. We're just going to let them all die.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a bit of you've gained enough from these compositions and the way that these two characters are juxtaposed, where it's almost like Schindler has realized how similar they are more than Goethe has, and and he's starting to manipulate that. And he's manipulating Goethe's trust of him to get what he wants, and gets the next, because when they're having that conversation through it's like through a window or in a door. I think it kind of tracks back and forth between a door and a window, goes through like, none of this makes sense. There's no reason we should do this, but I guess we'll do it. Whatever. You know,
he's even like, you're probably cheating me. You know,
Yeah,
like he knows it.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Does he say, if you're gonna make 200, if I'm gonna make 200, I know you're making 300, probably closer to 4.
Right. Yes.
But he
exactly.
admires that about him.
He
I think
does.
in a certain way too.
He does, and so you know, it's Schindler always does just enough to, but you know, it goes back to that train moment where he realizes like, oh, he's serious. He's actually trying to help these people.
Yeah.
But Schindler continuously does just enough to stay ahead of that, where he can still work with Goat, where Goat isn't completely like, no, you're just wanting to help these people. I'm not going to help you.
Yeah.
He keeps that business savviness going just enough. Yeah, for sure. I guess a little bit more in the production stuff. I'm glad we went ahead and talked about the characters, because that probably ended up being way better than if we would have like come back to them later. So
okay, good.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
But yeah, so the production, they started March 1st of 1993. It was very important to Spielberg that he filmed this during the winter. And so he didn't wait for Jurassic Park to be done. Jurassic Park was still in post-production during this time. And so I think they finished shooting Jurassic Park in December. And so Spielberg, they start shooting in the beginning of March in 93. But Spielberg's certainly already over there getting ready. So yeah, it's all shot in Poland, on location, Krakow, Auschwitz, a few other places. I think there ends up being, I think it's somewhere in my notes, 35 locations in total, I think. And so, the only thing that's not in Poland is the ending shots, which are in Israel, obviously. And so that's doesn't do that until it goes back to color. And so, yeah, it's this. I think that is interesting for Spielberg because he's such a blockbuster filmmaker. It was not the thing to do at this time, to do everything on location. Mm-hmm. You get your location shots and then you do the rest in studio because you have more control, all of that. And that's what Spielberg usually did. He would get his location shots. The same thing with Jurassic Park. And, with Hook was all in a studio. But yeah, he typically went the typical Hollywood route. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is interesting. And I think it probably plays alongside his, I guess his and Kaminsky's decision of how they were going to shoot the movie. Mm-hmm. They both kind of agreed on a documentary-like style. So you use mostly natural lighting. You do handheld cams. You deliberately don't use cranes and dollies, which all of that is very not Spielberg. And then the black and white, he wanted that newsreel immediacy of a black and white. We associate history with black and white. And so they made all of these decisions. And I think probably the shooting on location is I didn't read this directly, but it makes sense logically that that's just another, hey, let's make this as real as we can, documentary style. We're going to shoot it all in Poland.
Does it feel documentary style?
It doesn't feel documentary, like a documentary, but they were, all of the like shooting decisions they made were, let's do this like you would if you were shooting a documentary. So it is like that. So like the handheld camera. So there's really like anytime the camera is moving, it's not so smooth like you usually get in a Spielberg movie. You get some here and there, obviously. But yeah, you do get that handheld camera feel whenever like there's a crowd moving and you're getting a wide shot of the crowd, but then you're going into the crowd and you can see whoever's shooting it is like walking backwards in the crowd on this person's face. So I think it's kind of almost like how a documentary might look if it was shot really beautifully.
I mean, that's what I'm wondering. Is this just how Steven Spielberg sees things so cinematically?
Maybe. Because that's how they talk about it. When Spielberg and other people talk about the decisions made, they talked about, we wanted to do documentary style. It's interesting. It's very interesting.
It's just, what struck me upon this rewatch was how cinematic it was. Even the lighting and the black and white, it felt like I was watching a glossy film from the 40s or 50s, like a classy MGM movie. It feels so artificial to me in a way that doesn't strike me as guerrilla, and I'm just trying to put that in.
And I don't know. I wonder though, like, so when we think of documentary, we think like, oh, gritty, like in the moment and all that. But on the other hand, I have seen some very beautiful documentaries before.
Sure.
Very beautifully shot, very artistic in the way it's edited together. And so I almost wonder if it's just kind of like a connotation thing. Like if Spielberg were to shoot a full-on documentary, might it look like Schindler's List? Maybe, and so it might just be like, this is what happens when Spielberg shoots a documentary, It just looks like this.
I keep thinking about, and this might be just a leap, but I keep thinking about, George Lucas intended to make Apocalypse Now before he gave it to Coppola. And the way that he talked about it was very gritty, on the ground. We're going to go to Vietnam. We're going to take a small crew. We're going to make it, verisimilitude is going to be the thing, and Coppola's did not, the exact opposite of that. But given how closely Lucas and Spielberg are working at the time, I got to imagine that part of that, George would have been talking about that to Spielberg, about, this is how I would, if I were to have done this period piece, this is how I would have done it. And so I can't help but translate that to, if Spielberg's thinking documentary, he's probably thinking about it in Lucas mode, or you think of the other documentarians from the 70s, Panabaker or somebody like that, who's going to do it in that verite style, and it's just, it does not, even the shaky handheld scenes feel so cinematic. They feel so artificial, and I don't mean that as a criticism.
Right.
I think that's how we got this point across. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's just like, this is just what we would get if we ever got like a Spielberg directed documentary. Like if he had a vision to do this, tell this grand story, and as a documentary, real interviews, real like, because I mean, at the end of the day, this is the novel, and then by transitive property, the movie is kind of like a really actually good version of what you usually get in like those kind of murder TV shows, like where they're playing out the actual story with actors.
Yeah,
because
but what
that's
if it was
ultimately
Spielberg
what this
shooting it?
is. It's like, well, let's act this out. These
Yeah.
stories that we've gotten about all these facts. Let's turn these facts into an acted out story.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately, like, when you boil it down, what this is,
Yeah.
but done actually like really well.
It's funny. I keep thinking about Fablemans tells us this is the way that Spielberg looks at things, because you get
Yes.
that the bit where his stand-in Sammy is shooting home videos, and
Mhm.
people are like, "Why did you make your mom look so hot? What's the matter
Yeah.
with you?" So yeah, apparently that is the way he looks at the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think this is just like, if we ever were to get a Spielberg documentary about, I don't know who he would make a documentary about.
He shoots
Nothing
March
comes
of the
to mind.
Penguins too.
Yeah. It would just, I guess it would look like Schindler's List, since this is what he thinks. This is what he thinks. Maybe he just had never seen a documentary before. I doubt that, but
he just can't help himself.
Yeah, he couldn't help make it look incredible.
Yeah.
But it's funny because he would have been actually talking to George Lucas a lot, because Lucas was like doing all the finalization work for Jurassic Park for him.
Oh, okay.
And so Spielberg was having to approve everything. He was working on it a few nights a week, but Lucas was doing like he was kind of like overseeing the finalization and post, which kind of makes sense because it's, all the CGI is being done at ILM, and so that's Lucas's company, so it kind of makes sense. But they're also friends, so it makes sense in that way too. But so yeah, maybe Lucas was whispering, "You should do like documentary style," and this is what we got.
Yeah, I did, George. Check this out.
Look what I did. It's documentary style, and George is like, ah. Oh man. But yeah, so it's all on location. In fact, one of the first things they shoot, Liam Neeson flies out, as I said, right after being on Broadway. He flies out. He has 2 days of fittings, and then he arrives in Auschwitz, right next to the camp. It's the first thing he's shooting. And the producer that I mentioned earlier, Lustig, comes up to Neeson and is talking to him, and he points over at some of the barracks, and he says, "That's where I was imprisoned, right in that one."
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And so Neeson talks about how he just like, it just all of a sudden like hit him like a ton of bricks as soon as he said that. This is a different thing. This is different than anything I've ever done before. It's very serious, And so it was the scene what they shot was the scene where they're pulling the little girls out of the line going to the trains, and he runs over and is like, "What are y'all doing?" And he comes up with the
first scene he shot.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I need these little girls' fingers, to clean the inside of the bullets, which was a total fabrication. He came up with that on the spot. That's the way it's told in the book, is like he kind of like he was all the time doing stuff like that, like coming up with some reason why on the spot why he needed these people. And yeah, that's the first. And he stumbled over the lines. They had to do a bunch of takes because he said his knees were shaking. Because I mean, you just had your producer come over and say, "Hey, I was there, when it was happening," and then you have to shoot your scene. And he couldn't remember the lines, and yeah.
It's an intense scene. That makes total sense. What a way to throw him in.
Yeah, they threw him right in. I guess Auschwitz was just the first place they were shooting, and they had to. I mean, there's very few like good scenes to shoot, I guess. So I guess might as well might as well throw him in. But yeah, they filmed this really quickly. I want to say it was like let's see, they ended shooting in May 11th, so March, April, and half of May, really.
Wow.
So yeah, really quick turnaround. I read that sometimes they were doing like 40 shots in a day, which is a lot. I have in fact, next week, in a couple of weeks when we do The Lost World, I had a friend on who has worked on some film sets, and he was like, I mean, 10 shots in a day is pretty good, you know. On some sets, you know, it's 10.
Yeah.
You get 10 shots in a day. Like that's a good day, but 40 shots in a day is a lot.
40 on location in the
Yeah.
winter. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they're really moving. And Spielberg's, man, he struggles through this. He thought he was prepared. He had visited during pre-production, and he talked about he didn't cry. He just felt really angry. But then when he's there and he's shooting it, and I mean, you're basically like playing out these horrible things that really happened. It's just awful. And on evenings he talked about he would go home and just like break down crying. And with his wife and kids. His wife and kids moved to Krakow with him during this, which is just, man, that Kate Capshaw really loves him to do that.
I gotta tell you, yeah, this is. I still think of her as Billy, so
right.
I don't love her in that movie, and
No.
this is turning me around on her big time.
Yeah,
like savvy, smart, and supportive.
Remarkable. Yeah, she's a great human being. They have 5 kids at this point. At least one of which is an adopted kid. I think it's just one adopted kid at this point. But yeah, so I mean, he had her. His parents and Rabbi would visit him regularly, and then everyone always talks about he would get these weekly phone calls from Robin Williams, who would basically just do a stand-up. Spielberg talks about it as he would just do a stand-up routine for me on the phone and have me, howling with laughter. And he even talked about Robin Williams would do this thing where, like, whenever he would get the biggest laugh out of you while you were in the middle of that laugh, he would hang up. Like, he never said bye. He would just, like, once you get the biggest laugh, he just hangs up. That's the end of the conversation. Which is really fun. It sounds about right for Robin Williams. So he talks about that, and he would get SNL tapes sent to him to watch with some people. Those are some of the things that like helped him like not totally break down. But yeah, and then like I said, 3 nights a week, he would isolate himself to work on Jurassic Park post stuff. He had to approve a lot of, and he had a lot of resentment because of that.
Oh, really? Resentment towards Jurassic Park?
Yeah, I don't know if it was like, it wasn't specific. Wasn't specific to where like you could read it as he resented himself for allowing himself to like be put in that situation. He maybe resented the studios for putting him in that situation, or maybe just in general, just feelings of resentment for having to like take time away from this very serious movie to work on dinosaurs. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense,
Oh yeah.
So
he goes to Lost World, this next one after this, right?
Yeah, but it's a few years. But
that movie is so mean-spirited.
It is.
That I could kind of see him sort of, if he does feel resentment while doing...
Yeah, maybe so, yeah.
He just offloads it to the next time, because none of that's...
It's kind of like the Temple of Doom of the Jurassic Park franchise.
A lot of
built out of a lot of darkness and resentment, maybe.
Yeah.
But I would like to think he's in a better place when the Lost World comes around, just because, he did a lot of good coming out of this movie.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think he felt good about it. But maybe he still was dealing with, because I mean, it was a crazy year. I mean,
Yeah.
he felt an enormous weight. There was the technical weight of just making the movie. Like I said earlier, there were 35 locations. You're in midwinter in Poland. You have 126 speaking roles, 30,000 extras that you're working with. Those 35 locations had 148 sets between them. So that's a lot, and it's Spielberg. He's in the middle of all of that, you know. And then there's this psychological weight. They talk about how they would show up in a town and there would be freshly painted swastikas on some walls. Neeson and Kingsley told this story about they were in a bar one night, and this guy, this Polish guy, walks up to Michael Schneider, one of the Jewish actors, and asks him if he was a Jew. And he says, yeah. He's like, yeah. And the guy like mimes hanging his neck by a noose. And Kingsley stood up when they talked about it on the 25 years later panel. It almost sounded like they never exactly said what Kingsley did. They made it sound like he clocked the guy. So that's what I thought at first. But then I read somewhere else that he stood up and read him the riot act out loud, which sounds a bit more like Kingsley to me. So
I was about to say, that seems very much. I hear he does that quite often to people for all sorts of offenses. So.
Yeah. So, and then there's also this story that Ralph Fiennes tells of, he's in his Nazi uniform and they're on location. So there's people maybe living in some of the buildings, and there's this lady calls down to him from a window, and she's telling him, "I love your uniform," and she says something to the effect of, "I wish y'all were still around to protect us like you were back then." And it's just like, man, the ghosts of the past are like all around them. So they're dealing with that. It's emotion. All of the sets are emotionally charged. Spielberg talks about these two Israeli girls who, after the shower scene, had to take a few days off. They were just like so torn up. There's Spielberg. He talked also about the selection scene where they're stripped and they having them run through the mud. And he said he had to look away. The vision of these bodies running through mud while SS men were like casually laughing, and he just couldn't bear looking at it. So yeah, I mean, just all of this, and Spielberg talks about it's the most traumatic part of his career, is doing this. And man, I don't know, there's a degree to which you wonder, like, is it all worth it? And I'm sure he was asking himself that question as he was making it, like, is it worth putting myself and all these people through this? But yeah, I don't know if there's like maybe a cut and dry answer. I guess it depends person to person what their experience is. I can't speak
that's
for
the problem.
Can't speak for each person, but yeah.
How do you judge worth?
Yeah.
In this way.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a handsome film, but he's obviously going for more than that.
Right.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it enough that we remember in this particular way, flaws and all? Is it enough that, or did that create more damage? Is it enough that we represent and play out this thing, or did that somehow profane what happened? I mean, that's always the question around Holocaust art after the Holocaust.
Right. I did really love this. There was Spielberg talked about kind of a turning point. He talked about the German actors would like come up to him and want to talk about Jaws or E.T., and he just couldn't do it. He said he just couldn't hold a conversation with the German actors. for a long time. And there's this one point where it was Passover. They had some people come in to perform a Seder, and they did it. The German actors came and joined the Jewish actors, and so they read the Seder in both Hebrew and German, the Haggadah that they were reading. And he said after that moment and seeing that, it was just kind of a turning point for him. He felt like I guess it was almost like that was a moment for him where he could see, oh, this is important, because you can get stuff like this, this beautiful moment of these German actors coming together with all of these Jewish Israeli actors, and this, and we're in Poland, and the Germans are sitting side by side with Jewish actors and listening to a Haggadah being spoken. Like, it was probably a beautiful moment to experience, I'm sure. Very powerful. And he said after that, I'd talk to them about whatever they wanted, E.T. or Jaws or
restored the humanity for him.
Yeah, it did. It really did. And then also all through the shooting, Spielberg has these extras coming up and telling him their story. And that ultimately inspires him to start the Shoah Foundation, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, it's really incredible, crazy, just hard to fathom what it was like. Yeah, and then one big thing that Spielberg was like he was losing sleep over was exactly what we kind of talked about earlier. He wasn't making these kinds of movies. Yeah. He was making adventure movies and blockbuster movies. And what he was worried about was, will people watch this movie and see my name attached to it, and will they believe it? Will they think it's real? Will they find it credible? And I kind of have a lot of respect for him that's what he was losing sleep over. He was self-aware enough to know that this is important, what I'm making, to a degree, and I want people to take it seriously, and is my name going to harm that? Yeah. And that's what inspired him to do the last sequence where people, you transition back to color, you're seeing the real people with the actors, they're placing the stones on the grave. Like, that was, he said himself, it was kind of this desperate cry for credibility. And which was interesting to hear someone's, most filmmakers wouldn't want to say they made a decision out of desperation, but he was just being honest that's what that was. And I think it does work.
It totally works.
It totally brings you back to, this was real,
This is real.
Yeah.
And I would almost, if you were to take that line in isolation, that could feel very self-serving, this idea of wanting credibility, that I want to be taken seriously as a big boy director, like my buddies Marty and Francis and, all those. But I don't think within the context that we've been talking about, and especially in relationship to that scene, I don't think that's what the credibility that's worrying him. It's the truth of the event. And he seems aware that he doesn't want the glitz and the glamour and his basic filmmaking instincts, because like even when he's showing something horrible, I mean, it's the nature of film, and especially the nature of a filmmaker like him, even when he's showing something horrible, it's still exciting. The sequence that we were just talking about, the shower sequence, isn't that far removed from the Jurassic Park fence sequence. They're both working to build tension, and in both cases, it's what's going to happen, and then there's a payoff, and there's but the stakes of the fence sequence are the little boy's going to have a big adventure, and now we're going to get chased by velociraptors. And I love Jurassic Park. I'm not trying to diminish it.
And
but
none of it's real, and you know it.
Exactly. Yeah. As opposed to the actual psychological torture that somebody went to, where just a getting water from a shower is an unbelievable relief. And how can you? I don't think it's within any filmmaker's power. Maybe that's a bit too broad, but it's certainly not within his power to tell the reality of that within that scene. And so he was telling it as truthful as possible, which is why he needed to cut to just the plain spoken reality of these are the survivors. This is their story. And that's a totally different credibility. That's not a respect me as an artist. That's just a this happened and we cannot forget.
Yeah. And what's crazy to me is working through his filmography, you know, he has these movies where you know, he's thinking like, I can get best director for this movie. And like he's excited by that prospect.
Yeah.
And like I think the biggest one is E.T., you know, he has people basically telling him he's a shoo-in, you know, to get best director, and then he doesn't, and then there's films where he should have been nominated and wasn't even nominated, like Jaws, you know.
Yep.
And so he wants that. He, you know, he doesn't really shy away from, you know, talking about, you know, being disappointed that he didn't you know, win stuff. So, but, you know, he puts this off for 10 years after E.T. And by the time he gets to this point, he's just matured. So by the time he actually wins Best Director, it's very somber. You know, you can go watch his acceptance speech, and it's very somber. It's very like, you know, there's a bit of feeling unworthy, you know, at that point. Because if he would have won for Jurassic Park, it would have been, you know, without this movie on the table, it would have been very different. He probably would have been excited. It would have been like very celebratory. But with this movie, it's just interesting that this is what he wins Best Director for. It's this movie where he's refused the salary, you know, he's had a traumatic experience on, you know, making, and then like this is what he's celebrated for finally. And it's like, well, now it's like, yeah, I guess he talks about feeling pride, but he doesn't, you know, in interviews, but he doesn't talk about feeling pride in making, you know, having won awards for the movie and stuff. The pride he talks about is really like he feels proud to be Jewish after making this movie. And it's not like the movie that he's proud of. It's he's proud of his heritage. That's what he gets out of making this, which is a totally different thing. It's very interesting. And probably like very good for him, just personally, that this is the way things played out instead of you winning in 80, you know, in 83 for E.T. So,
though he deserved for E.T. and for Jaws.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, as far as other production stuff, really, I should mention I had set up earlier the second AD, the second assistant director. I don't know which one of those names it was from earlier, but there was in the 25 years later, Neeson talked about how pissed off he was at Spielberg because he had gotten like his hands manicured and stuff, and then he used the hands of the second AD for all those close-up shots. When you're introduced to Neeson was like, it wasn't even my hands. You know, what was so wrong with my hands? Which that whole sequence feels like, I think I heard someone else say it almost felt like a cologne commercial.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, yeah. I really, I was kind of taken aback by that because it's a very interesting way to introduce you to someone.
It is. I mean, and what jumped out at me in that same sequence is there's like a song and dance number going on, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, Spielberg sure loved to do musicals before he did West Side Story, and then I was like, oh wait a minute, I'm watching Schindler's List. I shouldn't be thinking about Temple of Doom or West Side Story or any of these sort of things, but it's there, and it works.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, by the time he gets the post, obviously he works really well and efficiently with Michael Kahn. They're like, I don't know, they do some great edits for these movies. He's, and then the score, he missed out on the scoring session for Jurassic Park because he had to move over to Krakow and start working on the movie. So that was the first movie he had ever made where he wasn't there for the scoring session. So this score, which ultimately wins for best score at the Oscars, John Williams, of course, does it. But Spielberg, he talks about how he really wasn't thinking about the score like he normally does. He didn't really have any ideas necessarily. He was just so focused on getting through the shoot. He just wasn't thinking of it. So they edited this at like a farmhouse. He said a real like rundown farmhouse in Long Island is the way he described it. And he had John Williams come out to that farmhouse and watch the movie. And he reached out to John Williams, had like violin. He talks about like I had violin on the mind for this movie as the main voice. And I'm trying to remember the violinist's name that he called.
Perlman?
Yes, it's like Perlman does the violin for the movie. And Perlman says basically he just kind of was like, yeah, I'll do it. And then John Williams did his John Williams thing, and he just kind of like played what John Williams wrote.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's really savvy how the score drops out for so long in the movie, and then when it starts to come back in, it is that violin piece after the liquidation, and it's perfect. It's winsome, and these little notes of melancholy that hit you, like you almost feel that sort of Williams heroic strain start to come up, and then it falls back down again.
Yeah, it's really well done. What I've noticed about John Williams through this series is that like sometimes he's really hitting on all cylinders, and then sometimes you get a score that almost feels like he's just kind of phoning it in.
Oh,
like,
really?
It just kind of, every once in a while you'll get a score where it's kind of like, this feels like just John Williams, just kind of like doing John Williams. It doesn't feel inventive or like, it doesn't feel, it just feels like it's,
I see.
It feels like you even kind of start to hear like, this kind of sounds like he just kind of like took this other score and twisted it a little bit to come up with this theme or whatever. And
those fall out in my mind, so
they do. And they're not, the thing is, the reason like he's so great is because even those are still really good. So but that's just the sense I get because I've been watching like Spielberg movies back to back to back in succession, and
you're knowing his moves now.
And so like the score for Always is like it has like those emotional beats that you can expect from John Williams, but it just kind of feels, it almost feels like recycled in that movie for some reason. And music is a very subjective thing, so it might just be like that particular theme just like didn't move me in the way that other ones did, like the E.T. one. And exactly. So But then,
heaven forbid you don't match the ET score each time, you know.
Which influenced the edit of the climactic sequence. You know, how often does a score influence the final edit? But yeah, so you know, the score is great. They finish up post, and yeah, this movie released in December of 1993. It really actually, I was looking into it. It actually only had like a limited release in December, which I didn't realize. It actually fully released in February, like a big expansive release.
Yeah.
Which it kind of like follows the lines of how a studio would release even now, like this is a movie going for the Oscar.
You get it in time for awards and then give it to everybody else.
Yeah. Which always makes me mad. I'm like, I want to see all the Oscar movies. Why don't y'all release them where I can see them?
Yeah.
But
if you've got to vote on awards movies like I do, it becomes annoying in another way, because that means like you have to crush all of the best movies of the year in one week. That's also like Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's not good.
I don't do that, but I kind of almost force myself to be like that, even though I have no stakes, just because
really?
I will do some like best ofs episodes every once in a while for the podcast, but I don't have like I get to decide when those come out. Like, I'm not submitting it to a critics association. So, but I still force the pressure on myself as a cinephile and podcaster. But yeah, this movie, it got $96 million in North America and $322 million worldwide, which really like is a huge return on a movie like this at this time. I can't help but make the recent parallel of like Oppenheimer and how incredible Oppenheimer did, because they're movies of a similar vein. Obviously this is a much more, I don't know, I guess this one feels more grim than the content for Oppenheimer, but still, I mean, the stakes of Oppenheimer are really high as far as like tragedy as well. So I don't know, it just feels like a interesting parallel of this movie finally winning Spielberg his Oscar, doing really well in the box office for being such a grim story, and then Oppenheimer being the same thing for Nolan, finally getting him his Oscar with the serious, incredibly well acted. You get black and white sequences even, makes a lot of money. Just an interesting parallel that I was thinking about.
Oh, I think that's totally fair. And both of them kind of have historical juice. I don't feel like I was young when Schindler's List came out. I was in my teens. Mm-hmm. And I remember, again, that sort of moral imperative to see Schindler's List. And there's a moral imperative to see Saving Private Ryan in a way that I don't feel like Oppenheimer had quite the same thing.
Yeah.
But I do feel like Oppenheimer had almost an artistic imperative, if that makes any sense at all. That it was such a well-made movie that everybody, even people that don't like to watch movies on that level, are still like, I want to see this in. Mm-hmm. I knew plenty of people that wouldn't have done this, that were like, where's the 70 millimeter IMAX playing at? Because I want to go watch it like that.
Yeah. And part of that is just like the internet age that we live in.
Of course.
You get that sort of hype. And if this movie would have come out now, it honestly probably would be a similar thing. Like, and it's partly that letterbox culture, and you have the film bros. That I wonder if the film bros would have been Spielberg guys like they are Nolan guys.
I
don't know.
think so. I bet you the film bros would have been all hardcore New Hollywood guys, you know.
Scorsese.
Like they would have been, Scorsese, Coppola, they would have been, you know, resentful of Spielberg.
What's funny is all those guys were like buddies.
Yeah, and they all worked in each other's movies. It's just insane. It's just, I love that.
De Palma even was in that group.
Oh yeah, well, De Palma's the one that did the scrawl. He tells George, you know, he tells Lucas, this is the dumbest thing.
Star Wars,
just write the scrawl. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you know, and Coppola's the one that tells Lucas to go do Star Wars, and Lucas is the one that tells Coppola to go do Godfather. You know, because it's like they're doing Zoetrope together, and they're like, we need money. So yeah, all of those fights are totally made up by us dummies.
Right.
Except for the ones with Paul Schrader. Everybody actually didn't like Paul Schrader because he was nuts. But that's something different.
Yeah. Schrader, what movie? It was Close Encounters. Schrader, him and Spielberg could not get on the same page. He was supposed to write Close Encounters, and that would have
on the same page with Schrader is usually a good thing. I mean, I love his movies.
Yeah.
But I do not want to hang out with that dude.
Yeah. Yes. His if the content of his movies tell you anything about him, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well.
Very conflicted people.
Yeah. But hey.
Yeah.
Good movies.
Yeah, this movie, Schindler's List, had mostly rave reception. Todd McCarthy in Variety said this is the film to win over Spielberg's skeptics. And I think that's probably true. Obviously he finally gets recognized by the Academy, which had mostly like kind of ignored him to this point. I mean, he had won, his movies had won technical awards, but never anything like this. The public reception, obviously making a lot of money, exceeded all expectations. I'm sure the Universal guys were all eating their words. It was even endorsed by political leaders. Bill Clinton was encouraging Americans to see the movie, which I think is a good thing. I think it's probably a good thing when there's a movie like this that comes out for someone to encourage people to go see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish more people would look at engagement with cinema as a public good.
Yes. Absolutely.
Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show.
Yeah, and of course the movie had its critics. It's people that didn't like it. That we've talked a lot about how cinematic this movie is. Well, a lot of people didn't like how cinematic it was. They thought, I guess they felt that it was inappropriate for the context. The girl, all the things that we've talked about, the shower scene, the girl in the red coat, even that final moment at the grave. People just felt like it was bad taste, I guess. A lot of critics did. Yeah. But I think for the most part, really, like, this kind of broke, I had mentioned earlier, a lot of people saw him as an artistic lightweight. And this is probably the major film that really allows him to, at least makes critics reconsider that that title that they had given him, I guess.
For sure. I mean, and there's always, you always think of the Theodore Adorno quote, there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
what that actually means is that the Holocaust broke reality, Western reality at least, in
Yes.
such a way that art can't deal with it anymore in the same way. And so, no, it's going to be, it's the Holocaust is profane, period. And there is no way of getting around it clean or approaching it, but you have to approach it. And it's never going to fit in such a way that that any sort of artistic object is going to be able to make us make sense of it or feel like we've processed it. There's always going to be a remainder, and it has to have that ethical remainder.
Yes.
But you gotta, again, the point that Adorno's trying to make there is you gotta keep looking and you gotta keep making sense of it, even with that remainder. You know, it's funny that you mentioned Oppenheimer, because it's the same thing there, that people were like, well, he's not really focused on the Japanese, and no, you're right, and
But
you
he's
get
not
to
Japanese.
say that. Right. Well, even if I did, what movie, what art, what work, what word could I say that can match that tragedy? You can't.
Yeah.
And so you're right to say it, and we need to keep saying it, but we also got to keep telling these stories and making these movies. And so I hear what they're saying, but you can't end with that critique either. It's got to be part of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And my whole thing is like, you know, I was thinking about this. I was telling my wife earlier, I was telling her what some of these critiques were and of the movie, which she's never seen it. You know, she knows obviously about it, but I was telling her, you know, what's odd to me about these critiques is for all of human history, we've told stories, a lot of them based in reality or kind of trying to make sense of reality. That's how we process things. And so I just don't understand why this is like, it's so hard for some people to see, like, he's telling a story, he's trying to make sense of it. He doesn't have the vanity to think that he's solving something with this movie, but it's something that is important to process and to think through. And that's what the movie's doing. It's trying to think through, why did this happen? What do we do with it? It's what you walk away with as someone who has viewed it. How could this have happened? What do we do with this now that we've seen this?
Right.
And that's what stories are supposed to do. And that's, you know, that's what we've always done as humans. We tell stories to try to process things.
Yes.
And the big criticism, the most like vehement one, came from people who kind of followed that philosophy that you do not put images on the Holocaust.
Okay.
So, you know, it's one of the big people that came out against the movie was Claude Lanzmann, who was a journalist. He was a member of the French resistance during World War II and made the landmark documentary Shoah, which was a 9-hour movie. It took him 12 years to make it. It has no archival footage, no footage of the Holocaust. It's all interviews with people about their experiences, which I've never watched this. I don't. It's one of those things where it's like, I should watch it, but also I don't know.
It's a tough ask, isn't it?
It's 9 hours. And but yeah, he writes this article in the French. It's a French publication called Le Monde, and really like says that this Schindler's List is a kitsch melodrama that has trivialized the Holocaust, is the gist of kind of what he says. And this is a quote from Lanzmann. He's following that idea that you should not put images on the Holocaust. He says, what I what I criticize Spielberg for fundamentally is showing the Holocaust through a German. Even if he saved Jews, it completely changes the approach to history. It is the world upside down. I have a sense that he made an illustrated Shoah. He put images where there are none in the Shoah, and images kill the imagination. I thought that after the Shoah, a certain number of things could no longer be done, but Spielberg did it. And it's one of those things where people that hold that philosophy, I totally get it. You know, these are things that happened. We should not show them. It's kind of my understanding of it. You shouldn't, because the minute you put in any sort of image on it, you deplete its potency, I guess, to them. I really get it. I really understand it, even though I disagree with it. And yeah, I thought Camille Nevers, at the time, posted, had a response in another publication. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but Cahiers du Cinéma. It's another French publication.
Your French is better than mine.
Yeah, I'm in Lafayette, Louisiana, so that helps. Okay. You have to pronounce all the roads are in French. Yeah, I'm not from here. I'm from Georgia originally, so it was tough. It was a tough transition. But this is a quote from her. She said, "Schindler's List is the image of the survivor's story." Well, we do not forgive Spielberg for precisely putting them into images. Just as he did not make a film about Auschwitz, at no time does the filmmaker put images on the Holocaust. Schindler's List has much more to do with the parable or the tale, a biblical parable in many ways identical to that of Noah's Ark. Rather than the images of the apocalypse, Spielberg gives us the story of a Genesis. So the way she sees it is he's telling it's kind of like what I've been saying, like he's telling a story that is based on things that happened. He's not trying to like put images on the Holocaust to demean it or to diminish it. And I guess, you know, it's interesting. It's that question of how that we've been talking all around is how to tell stories that cannot be told but must be told. Yep. And you know, at the end of the day, the way I feel like this Camille Nevers is trying to hint at is that there is room for more accessible tellings of stories. You don't have to require people to watch a 9-hour documentary to really get the gist of it. You can have this very cinematic movie and walk out of it and think, how did we as a human race let this happen? How did they get there? Yeah. How did this happen? How can we stop it from happening again? You can get that walking out of Schindler's List just as much as you can get it after watching Landsman's Shoah, I feel like.
I don't know. Keep going now. I'll push back on it a little bit.
No, that's good. That's how I feel. Now, I do think, and this is something. So, I've been listening to a book, biography, basically of Spielberg, along with reading through some other stuff. But the author of that was basically saying that at the end of the day, viewers have to decide for themselves if the freedoms taken in the depiction is artistically valid. And I really thought that was a wise way to think about it. Each viewer has to decide for themselves. And really, like, I think at the end of the day, while I disagree with Landsman's for myself, I can't really say for everyone if that's true. Like, for him, it is true that it demeans it, and you know, that's how he sees it. It's at a certain point, once you put your art out there, it's kind of up to the viewer
Absolutely.
of what to do with it. And if you say it demeans this thing that happened, then that's true. There's some things that can be, ultimately true, but some things are like interpreting art can't be really ultimately true. There is subjectivity in the truth that's depicted in it, and it has to be. It is up to the viewer, what to do with it to a certain degree. But there is also a responsibility on the artist of how they put it out there. It's not like I'm going to do what I want, and if you hate it, you hate it. With something like this, it can't be that on the part of the artist actually making it. And like we said, we don't. It seems like neither of us really think Spielberg was in that mindset.
No.
But yeah. What are your thoughts on all this?
I mean, so I think I'm mostly sympathetic with what you're arguing, and certainly Landsman. I feel like you need to. You have to retain some of the unresolvability of the Jewish Holocaust being such. I mean, all Holocausts are this, but and specifically in this relationship, the Jewish Holocaust is a event of such enormity and such unspeakable profanity. Like it's we can't put into words death on that level, and that it becomes something like, at the risk of sounding too religious, like the name of God. As soon as you have a name or a representation of God, then you've already limited God. I love the Paul Tillich description of God constantly fading from whatever representation of God that you put forward, or constantly escaping. And it's the same thing with something as horrible as this. And so representation is always fraught. And I fear that a lot of the way that we talk about art, especially I think in the last 20 years, maybe a downside of that letterbox thing, or I would argue more of a downside of sort of a sports sort of awards focus. This kind of competition that's put onto art that seeks a resolvable interpretation. This is what it is. And the Holocaust is so huge that it can never be encompassed by representation.
Right.
Which means that whenever you're approaching the Holocaust, you need to approach it askance, with the understanding that you are getting a glimpse of it. I'm pulling a lot from Emmanuel Levinas. You know him, the Jewish philosopher. I love him, and he would not have. I mean, he was weird about literature and cinema and together. So I know I'm perverting him a little bit, but it's that what he talks about is the relationship between the saying and the said, right? As soon as the words come out, the words are already, the person who spoke those words is already faded from history. And so you're just grasping a representation that's actually representing infinity and so much more. All that's a long way of saying that, that when we represent the Holocaust or any sort of mass evil like that, we need to be seeking, not, okay, I get it. We need to be seeking, there's so much more, and I'm just working with this. The problem that makes the movies, I mean, I agree with you, humanity always telling stories. I think, though, that you need to continue, that we also need to keep in mind the specific medium of cinema in relationship to the Jewish Holocaust. The cinema is both spectacular and mechanistic by its very nature, in a way that no other storytelling, maybe there's some internet stuff that's that's more of this. But mechanics and the spectacle are just inherent in this art form.
Mhm.
You know, this is why the old line, you can never make an anti-war movie because war always looks cool. Or
Sure.
that problem that we run into when, you know, we're telling a true story and you see a picture of the dude and it's a schlubby dork like me, but he's played by, you know, some incredibly handsome or incredibly beautiful actor. Cinema is spectacular and it's beautiful, and the Nazis knew this.
Mhm.
Mechanism and cinema were parts of how fascism operated,
Yeah.
and how the Holocaust happened. And so we also need to be aware of that. And I don't think I haven't seen Show Up, but I feel confident in telling you, even if I sat there and watched all 9 hours of Show Up, it would be profane for me to think that I have understood the Holocaust.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yep. Mhm.
And so I look at Schindler's List and I am all for the populist aspect of it. I find it incredibly moving. But I fear, I worry, that people can walk away from it and say, okay, I got it. Because, especially now, when we live in the United States where fascism is in vogue again.
Yeah.
So how does this happen? Part of the way that it happens is that humans, when we tell stories, make sense of things, but just because we receive a story doesn't mean that we understand the ethical you know.
Right.
And cinema is uniquely suited to allow people to watch something and feel something and separate that from their day-to-day lives. You know, it's the reason that Elon Musk can watch Parasite and say, what a great movie. When it's like, dude, that movie's about you. You are the bad guy. Or the reason that Amazon can put out like a TV show like The Boys, which is all about how Amazon makes evil Nazi superheroes, and Amazon's not scared of the critique because most people are going to watch it and it's going to bounce right off of them.
Yeah.
And so all of that being true means that I can't read these critiques and say, you know, I need it. I need even though I don't entirely agree with, I find Schindler's List to be a wonderful, ethical, powerful movie.
Yeah.
We need those other things to say,
to push back on that. Yeah.
And Spielberg clearly felt that, I think.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what makes this movie so special.
Yeah.
Is that he wrestled with that and it's on screen.
Yeah. And you can feel it when you see him talk about it, that he was wrestling with it. And, you know, I should say, like, I agree with everything you said. I guess my big thing is something like this is something that you should walk away with not answers but more questions. And I think that's the big thing, and I think that's what Landsman would want with Showa. I don't think he would want you to walk away with feeling like you have the answers. I think he would want you to walk away with more questions than you walked in with. And I think that's what the best cinema along these lines does. Obviously, not all cinema is interested in that. Some of it's just for fun, and that's great too. You know, you've talked about, you've done a lot of superhero work, and a lot of that's just fun. And yeah, that's great too. But movies like this, you really absolutely should not walk away feeling like you understand. I think you can walk away with more empathy, but that's not the same as like understanding necessarily, because there is a degree to which, like, I don't know if anyone ever will understand how or why exactly this happened. we know a lot of reasons, and we can wrestle with all that. But yeah, I can say the number 6 million Jews killed, but that's just a number. It's not it doesn't really represent the actuality at all. Exactly. Even though it's a fact. Yeah. It's not that number 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust is a fact, but it's not a truth. The truth is something that's a bit unattainable, a bit unfathomable, and for something like that. Yeah. And it very much relates to things you like your parallel with the name of God. There might be things where, if you're religious, if you believe in a God, then you might know the fact, like you might think it's a fact God created everything, and you're like, that's a fact. But that's not the truth. The truth is something beyond that, and it's a bit unfathomable, a bit ungraspable, and our language tries to, reach for that and help us to think about it, but it doesn't nail it down. And I think that is an important thing to remember with a movie like this is nothing is nailed down here, but it gives us something to work with, I guess, another tool to work with to try to grasp something, to learn something, to be changed in some way. And I really, really love that. I feel like I'm learning and growing through our conversation. So
yeah, me too. I mean, it's I love the way that you said that, because I mean, ultimately, a movie like Schindler's List has a twofold purpose, right? One is remembering what happened, and I don't mean to diminish that, but that part's going to have that level of imperfection. The other one is kind of what you just touched on there, is then how do we prevent this from happening again? And it does threaten to turn the story of the Holocaust into an analogy, like a lesson. But also, we need that lesson and analogy. I mean,
right.
We are constantly on threat of doing this all over again, and we're staring it down right now in the United States. I mean, it was never that far. Hitler got a lot of his ideas from the way that that white people treated black people in the United States. So we were never far from that in the first place.
Right.
But anyway, that, like you just said, there's something that we can grasp. There's something that we can take from that. And gosh, if you take just enough, if you just come out of that saying, I can love somebody else, or at least have empathy with somebody else, even just a smidge, then that's pretty darn good. I think that the movie's kind of justified its entire existence. If we just move that needle just a little bit, that doesn't resolve all the other questions, but I think that idea of grasping and taking something from it is just as important as everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm trying to. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff we could talk about in this movie. We've hit on a lot of stuff. I did want to go back to, before we kind of share some final thoughts, the names, because the movie is bookended by names. You start with people arriving, and you start with people arriving, and it's like this contrast that you get at the beginning of the movie. It's like their names are being taken. Like, give me your name. Come on. There's this, like, say your name, move on. There's a lot of wide shots. You get some shots of, you get some, like, closer in shots, but it's this, like, almost like give me your name, move along. We're trying to efficiently get through this. And that's at the beginning. And then at the end, when you get them saying their names so that they can, be put on the trains to go to Brinlitz, it's like it slows down. It's their name and it's like where their names were being taken before, now they are giving their names.
Yeah.
And it's this contrast of names being taken and then names being given. And it's like, I mean that in two ways. In one sense, it's like Schindler has given them back their name. So it's given to them. But in another sense, the way that it's shot is that they are giving their names. It takes time to let you hear them say their name. It's not fast and, mechanical like it is at the beginning.
Yes.
It doesn't even really show, except for, blurred in the foreground, the people like writing stuff down and checking people off. You don't really hear anything from them. And I thought that was a really, really beautiful contrast that I noticed. And I have this quote by, it's from this book, The Drowned and the Saved, by Levi, Primo Levi, I think is his name. And he said, people lose their individuality as soon as they become oppressed, defined as a group. And I think that's what's happening all throughout the movie. What I love is one of the major thing, the major like quote unquote cinematic thing that I noticed that Spielberg did through the whole movie was he would do these wide shots of these crowds, but he never did a wide shot without several, at least, close-ups of individual faces. And it might not be faces that are like characters. It's a lot of it's just extras. But he's like, yes, here's the crowd, here's all the awfulness going on, but look, here's a face. This is a person. Here's a face. This is a person. And so all those things put together, I just feel like there's this theme of giving people back their names, giving them back their individuality, and in a sense, them all along somehow in the midst of it, holding on to it so that they can take it back when they can again. And I just loved that. I thought that was so well done and beautiful in the movie. At the end when they're giving their names, I was able to like smile a little bit after all of that, because it's this beautiful moment. It's and the power has shifted, in a sense, not completely yet, but it's the beginning of it. It's the genesis of the power shift, them being able to take back their names. So I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on that? Or
I mean, I didn't put it together the way that you just did. That's brilliant. One thing that does pop to my head though while we're talking about this is I wonder if that helps us kind of make sense a little bit of the centering of Schindler in this way. That the way that you've talked about, Schindler is the center of all of their stories.
Yeah.
And that's theirs, even if we would feel better if it worked a little bit different. That's theirs. And so in a way, then they're also giving Schindler his name to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
That because if it wasn't for them, he would have just been a schmoozing German businessman.
Yeah.
One of many from the time that, I'm sure he's not the only war prophet. I mean, we saw that in the movie. He's not the only war profiteer. He wasn't the only guy. And because of these people that sort of called him into responsibility, he's somebody that we talk about here in 2024.
Yeah,
we're still remembering it, and I think that there's an echo of that in the scene in Israel with the stones. Is that it's not just it's them reclaiming their names and then using their names to honor Schindler and to make him into a worthy person, a person who had a worthy life.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. And without them too, we wouldn't know who he was.
Exactly.
Because he was for all intents and purposes a failure after this.
Yeah.
He moved to Argentina. He had a failed business there. He moved back back to Germany or Poland and had a couple of failed businesses there. These Schindler Jews were supporting him. They were sending him money. And he was having to live off of that for lengths. He failed in his marriage. He tried to stay married, but Emily Schindler ended up staying in Argentina, and he moved back. And he has his moments. He was honored and was able to plant a tree on the what is it called, the Avenue of the Righteous or something like that. I can't remember. It says it in one of the little title cards at the end, and it talks about it in the book too. But basically, he was declared a righteous man by Israel and the rabbis or whatever that kind of do that ceremony, and was able to plant a tree. People that are declared righteous are able to plant a tree on this certain road. Really cool. So he's honored in that way. But for all and other than stuff like that, he's essentially a failure after this, and he has no name after this.
Yeah.
It's like this exchange. And the crazy part is it's by this guy from what we can tell, wasn't even like that great of a guy.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, he was probably very changed by this whole experience. So I would like to think, as far as I can tell, he was a bit of a different man after this. But I don't know that, he, it's just interesting. Like they have, Paul Page, Pfefferberg is the one who was persistent to get this story told. And without him, nobody would know who Oskar Schindler is.
Yeah.
So there is a really real sense that they gave him a name too.
Yep.
One of the cool things that I can't remember if it's just something I read or something that was an actual title card at the end was that there's, I want to say at the time of the movie, maybe there's like only 4,000 Jews still alive in Poland, but there were 6,000 descendants of Schindler Jews alive. That's incredible. And it's all just because this war profiteer made one good choice.
Yeah.
He was urged by these people who I think were able to hold on to they had some sort of hope that they held on to. You don't really see, you can see a little bit of it in the movie if you're really looking for it. It's not exactly that movie. It's not exactly the movie of how these people held on to hope.
Right. No.
But obviously they had something. I think it was A Man's Search for Meaning. The author's name is escaping me. I was hoping you would save me. Viktor Frankl.
I'm so sorry. It's like 12:30 here
Yeah.
my time, so
my
my
bad.
brain is not running like it should.
Viktor Frankl
Yes.
talked about that in Man's Search for Meaning. He talked about how the people that survive are the people who were able to somehow have hope. As soon as you lost all hope, you died. And yeah, it's really just incredible that these people were able to do that in such just atrocity. And yeah, I think the whole names thing is just kind of a picture of that. Their names are taken from them, and I say that, but I think now that we're getting further into this discussion, I think it was a delusion by the Nazis to think that they could take their names away from them. And I think this story is just one little testament to that they were deluded to think that they could actually take these people's personhood away, when it was never theirs to take in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. That's the oppressor playbook, though.
Right.
That's what you do.
Right.
Take their identity, take their culture, take their name, and it never works.
Yeah.
The people are going to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to wrap things up, I think this is a really cool moment for Spielberg. We've got to bring it back to Spielberg, because at the end of the day, this is a series on Spielberg. And I think as a final thought, kind of my takeaway was just how your work in a lot of times can impact you just as much as your work impacts the world around you. A lot of times when we think about our work, we think about, okay, how am I going to impact the world around me, whether it's, in your business or, for you, your writing. What do I have to say that will hopefully inspire others or make others think? But a lot of times we forget that the process of making our work changes us too. And I think that's a big thing that happened for Spielberg. And the Shoah Foundation is the kind of like tangible thing we can see from that. I wrote down this quote from Spielberg that I loved. He said, "I was so ashamed of being a Jew, and now I'm filled with pride. This film has kind of come along with me on this journey from shame to honor. My mother said to me one day, I really want people to see a movie that you make someday that's about us and about who we are, not as a people, but as people. So this is it. This is for her." And I just thought that was really beautiful, him just realizing how much he changed through this process, and honoring his heritage and becoming in tune with it. And I thought that was wonderful. He, his shares of Schindler's List was about 6 million, and that was the seed that started the Shoah Foundation. He got contributions from Lou Wasserman Foundation, Universal, Time Warner, NBC. So it was a big endeavor. In the first few years, they were in over 50 countries, and got over 52,000 survivors recorded in over 30 languages. So it was a huge, huge endeavor. And they were able to, with USC, the University of Southern California, to get a better, they kind of shifted it into the university so that they could get better digital preservation. And in 2012, this website, Eyewitness, with an I, the letter I, Witness, launched. And it's like this educational thing. Students and teachers can access this website and watch all of these, accounts, these eyewitness accounts of what they went through, and watch these people tell their stories. And it's like this legacy that Spielberg has. It's funny because, Lanzmann berated Spielberg for doing it this way instead of letting, the people tell the stories. But really, like, this sparked the more important thing, which was exactly what Lanzmann was wanting, which is he invested tons of money and effort into recording all of these stories. To the degree that now they actually are doing other genocides. They have tons of accounts from Rwandans and Armenians and Cambodians, and they're expanding, the scope of it, and it's really an incredible endeavor. Really, really, I think it's just really, really cool to see that's what came out of this movie. And probably, honestly, the most important thing about this movie was that it inspired Spielberg to do that.
Yeah,
I
never disagree with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, all that to just, I don't know, it is just a thought that I had of like, your work changes you, and yeah, embrace that like Spielberg did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's all I have. Did you have any final thoughts as we wrap things up?
I don't think so. I'm sure I'll think of them as soon as we stop
Yeah.
recording. But
like I said, I mean, there's honestly a ton more we could talk about. Really, like every little sequence you could probably break down, and examine. And we didn't even really talk much about the girl in the red coat, who's on the movie cover right here behind me.
Can we just say it's good? It's a good choice.
It is. It's a cinematic choice.
Yes.
And he was criticized for that, but it's this. Yeah. It is.
Potent image. It does its job.
Yeah.
I don't think it's overly sentimental. I don't.
Yeah, it's definitely not sentimental when you end with the girl scared under a bed alone.
Yeah.
So yeah. 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 That, I guess that counts as a final thought.
Okay.
Wrapping
Good.
up with the girl in the
settled
red
that
coat.
debate.
Obviously, to me, I mean, this is one of so far about as good as it gets with Spielberg, a Spielberg movie. I mean, it's, I don't know, it feels like you shouldn't rate this movie. I rate all the movies I watch. I just, it helps me to like organize things. So like, but I mean, it was hard for me not to rate this a 5-star, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But because it's an incredible work to me. And I'm not Claude Lanzmann, who probably would have given it a 0 out of 10. So
that's okay. People are allowed to give zeros.
That's great. He's allowed to, right?
Yeah.
Ratings are I always say ratings are arbitrary. They don't mean anything.
They are 100% arbitrary.
Yeah.
But that doesn't keep you from getting yelled at online.
Yes.
for ratings that you put on things. I agree with you, though. I would also give it 5 out of 5. I
Yeah.
can't think of on what grounds it does something poorly.
Yeah.
It's impeccably made. It's morally complex. It's beautiful. I mean, there's just
but I don't really have any quibbles with the movie. And most movies I have at least one little quibble with, but I just really don't for this one.
I do have one small one.
Ooh, good.
Okay.
That's
Ray
good.
Fiennes puts on weight. He does a lot of belly acting in certain scenes where he's really
pushing it out there.
Yeah, this is a man with a belly. Come on, dude.
Yeah,
I think I push it too.
I think I read he put on like 30 pounds or something like that.
He doesn't do it throughout the entire movie, but there's definitely scenes where he's like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah,
pull it back some. But minor quibble, 5 out of 5 movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of we've talked about it ad nauseum at this point that people like Claude Lanzmann are 100% entitled to think it's not good on ethical grounds. I think you can watch a movie and say this is probably a 10 out of 10 cinematically, but because of what I think the movie's doing, it's a terrible movie.
That needs to happen.
Yeah. We talked about the first Joker at the beginning, and I think it looks pretty good. It's it's very cinematic, you could say. But I just don't like what it's doing at all.
Gosh.
But maybe I shouldn't have brought it back around to that.
You're gonna get me fired up again.
It's too late. I already did it. But
No, I'll let it pass. It's a bad
we
movie. Don't
can
watch
pick
that.
it back up when we talk in the next episode.
That's true.
Or maybe
I
we
do
should
write about Joker in my book. So,
but yeah, that's all we have for this week. If you have any thoughts on Schindler's List, feel free to. It's always great to send thoughts in. You can establishingshotpod.com. You can find all the ways to contact me. There's lots of ways. All the online ways you can contact me. But really that's it for this week. Joe is going to be joining me again next week for just going to interview him a little bit about some of his work. He's written a book about superhero movies through kind of a theological lens. And so we'll hear a little bit from him about that. And then, yeah, that's we'll pick back up with The Lost World the week after that. So that's what we've got coming up. More dinosaurs. It is really strange to kind of put dinosaur parentheticals around Schindler's List, but
so weird.
This is the predicament I've put myself in with this series. So, yeah,
Spielberg put you in it.
Yes, it's Spielberg. I'll blame it on Spielberg. But Joe, why don't you tell people where the best places to follow you are?
I am Joe Writes Words on all of the socials.
Great.
It's basically the same information on all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I just copy and paste until one of them wins. But
right.
Joe Writes Words on all of them, or JoeWritesWords.com.
Cool. All right, and I'll make sure to put that in the episode description in a link so people can just click on that. But yeah, thanks for coming on. That is all we have for this week. I've been Eli Price for Joe George. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We will see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.